Pues muchas gracias por su asistencia a las que están de manera presencial. También tenemos algunas personas conectadas virtualmente. Y bueno, pues como parte de Equidad de Género, Ciudadanía, Trabajo y Familia, me presento, yo soy Adriana Jiménez Patlán, soy la directora de Equidad y bueno, pues estamos muy contentas de recibirles en este espacio en el centro de la ciudad, que es la anfitriona que nos ha dado la Secretaría de las Mujeres de la Ciudad de México. Este es un espacio pues del gobierno de la ciudad que además es muy lindo. Y bueno, decirles que en Equidad de Género estamos cumpliendo 30 años y una de las cosas más importantes que nos ha impulsado a seguir siendo parte del movimiento feminista es justamente ir repensando otros mundos posibles. Y hace 30 años que comenzábamos, fuimos pioneras. Aquí está justamente la doctora Lucía, que forma parte de Equidad y que siempre, un aplauso porque es de nuestras pioneras en Equidad. Y justo este pensamiento de la economía feminista resultó para que en su momento fueron los presupuestos públicos para la igualdad. De ahí salió el anexo 13, que tiene que ver con el avance de los derechos de las mujeres, el análisis de ese presupuesto. Bueno, pues la doctora Lucía formó parte junto con la maestra Alma Colín, que también está aquí, que forma parte de Equidad y que muchos de ustedes la conocen, y le pido un aplauso también. Acá está Alma. Y justamente durante esta visión que hemos tenido, esta visión de la economía feminista, pues para nosotras es un honor contar con la maestra Emilia Reyes, que es una parte muy importante de esta reunión, que vamos a hablar de muchas cosas disruptivas, pero que tienen que ver con la justicia económica, que justamente, como hace 30 años hemos pensado cosas innovadoras, la mente de la maestra Emilia y de muchas personas también están pensando en la economía disruptiva, que ella ya lo va a explicar mucho más, por eso está aquí. Y pues gracias a todas y de nueva cuenta, bienvenidas. Adelante, maestra Emilia.
Gracias, Adriana. Muchas gracias, Adriana, y hola a todas las personas que están aquí con nosotras. Hay también muchas personas acompañándonos virtualmente alrededor del mundo. Les saludamos también. Es un honor estar aquí en este Festival de la Ruptura, en este Festival de The Linking. Yo soy Emilia Reyes, soy la coordinadora de la campaña de campañas y también soy la directora del programa de políticas y presupuestos para la igualdad en equidad de género y ciudadanía, trabajo y familia. Y lo que nosotras estamos proponiendo en alianza con South Feminist Solidarity es que no podemos seguir buscando agendas reformistas cuando tenemos un sistema económico que es genocida, ecocida y que profundiza desigualdades. Nosotras venimos de una tradición feminista que se llama el feminismo de la ruptura, en donde no queremos incluir a las mujeres en ninguno de estos espacios de ningún tipo. El sistema es sumamente dañino y nos está llevando ya a un riesgo planetario y las desigualdades se incrementan. No hemos arreglado ningún reto del patriarcado, del racismo, de la división internacional del trabajo, la división racial del trabajo, ni la división sexual del trabajo. Y por eso estamos planteando ahora una ruptura. El marco de la teoría de la dependencia del sur global nos dice que nuestros países nunca han podido desarrollarse. De hecho, estamos condenados al subdesarrollo. Y de hecho estamos incluso condenados al desdesarrollo, a desdesarrollarnos, a nunca poder alcanzar nuestros proyectos soberanos de autosuficiencia y autonomía. Y por eso en este día nos estamos reuniendo con activistas, intelectuales, feministas, personas pensando en cuáles son las alternativas que tenemos para todo el sur global y para todo el mundo. Y este es el programa que vamos a tener el día de hoy. Nosotras en español hemos hecho en este momento una traducción disruptiva del término de delinking. En español tradicionalmente se llama desvinculación. Ahora le estamos llamando ruptura porque queremos meterle un marco feminista y hacer una alianza entre nuestro linaje y el sueño que tenemos para un futuro también, con igualdad para todas las personas, sin discriminación de ningún tipo y que pueda centrar el bienestar de las personas y el planeta. Entonces, les damos mucho la bienvenida a este espacio. Ya les iremos contando del proceso de South Feminist Futures, que fue la iniciativa feminista desde donde feministas del Sur Global nos reunimos para empezar a pensar en esta nueva iniciativa de ruptura y que ahora en la Ciudad de México está dando paso a una alianza mucho más grande para empezar con un esfuerzo mayor desde el Sur Global para hacer alianzas políticas y buscar una ruptura del capitalismo, del colonialismo y del imperialismo. Entonces, tenemos aquí presente a Sherin Talat, que es fundadora, que es parte del South Feminist Solidarity, junto con Equidad de Género y muchas otras organizaciones feministas del Sur Global, y está aquí justamente también para saludarles y contarles más de esta iniciativa. Muchas gracias.
Thanks a lot, and I'll speak in English. It's an honor to open the first Delinking Festival, a space to think and act beyond limits that imposed by the global capitalistic system, the colonial hierarchies, and patriarchal economies. Delinking is not isolation. I don't need to listen to myself. Thank you. Delinking is not isolation. It's actually self-determination on our resources, our futures, our life. It means reclaiming our right to define development in our own terms. Across the Global South, feminist movements are showing how this is possible through food, sovereignty, community care, economies, energy transitions, and debt resistance. Today, we gather in Mexico City. We do more than share ideas. We strengthen a collective commitment to build economy centered on life, equity, and justice. This is not only an act of strategy, it's an act of action. Delinking is rebellion. Women is putting the theory ahead by acting all the time. Women in our mountains are building cooperatives. Women in farmers in farming are reclaiming lands. Youth around the world are rising against debt. So we are not asking for reform, we are building power. We are saying no to slavery. We are saying no to false solutions. And this festival is a call to conspire for life, to imagine a world where care replaces profit, where justice replaces extraction, and where our movement move together. So let's delink and rise. Thank you.
Bueno, pues como verán, estamos muy emocionadas, se vienen cosas muy interesantes y a partir de este momento damos por inaugurado el primer Festival de la Ruptura desde el Sur Global. Adelante, Emilia.
Muchas gracias por esto. Le pido al panel que entonces dejemos la mesa. We should clear the table. Y ahora le voy a dar la bienvenida también al equipo de Petenera Consulting, que tienen un video que van a lanzar en la premiere el día de hoy sobre una serie sobre ruptura, sobre delinking. Este es el primer episodio sobre imperialismo y esperamos que lo disfruten. Entonces damos la bienvenida al panel a Lénica Reyes y a Yuri, que nos van a acompañar. Son las artistas, parte del equipo de artistas detrás del video. Adelante. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, buenos días. Estamos muy contentas de estar aquí. Voy a leer porque como tenemos ya el tiempo muy rápido y me puedo, no sé, cuando me pongo a hablar y me pongo a cantinflear casi porque me emociono mucho al querer decir muchas cosas. Hay mucho que decir de la producción de estos audiovisuales. Entonces, bueno, en primer lugar agradezco mucho a Equidad de Género, a Campaña de Campañas, al CEPI por recibirnos el día de hoy, a todas las personas e instituciones que están haciendo posible que se haga este festival. Agradezco especialmente a Emilia, Denise y Alma por creer en nosotras y sumarnos a este proyecto de artivismo. Confiaron en que una pequeña empresa cultural como la nuestra, empeñada en romper discursos coloniales en lo que se denomina Latinoamérica, podría aportar a su misión de cambiar el mundo. Lo que verán es fruto de un diálogo constante entre especialistas y creadores. Aterrizar conceptos técnicos a un lenguaje visual fue un reto estimulante del que aprendimos muchísimo. Gracias también por esta oportunidad de aprendizaje y crecimiento. Para que nos conozcan un poco mejor, les voy a contar brevemente qué es Petenera Consulting, nuestra empresa. José Miguel Hernández Jaramillo, que está aquí, y yo, ambos doctores en etnomusicología egresados de la UNAM, fundamos esta empresa al darnos cuenta que tristemente la producción académica rara vez trasciende efectivamente a la sociedad. Decidimos salir de la carrera universitaria y fundar nuestra empresa para dedicarnos a la divulgación musical y cultural con rigor, pero con un lenguaje accesible. Nuestra misión es combatir los prejuicios coloniales, imperialistas, eurocéntricos, clasistas, racistas, machistas que aún existen en los discursos que narran y que se producen en la cultura iberoamericana. Y justamente desde esta trinchera, hoy presentamos nuestro quinto audiovisual animado que aborda el tema de ruptura o de linking, una propuesta en la que creemos firmemente se debe potenciar. Nos alegra poder ayudar a generar materiales divulgativos y pedagógicos que permitan socializarla. Este capítulo nos presentó un gran reto creativo. El guión aborda realidades duras y urgentes, saqueos, golpes de Estado, genocidios que ha sufrido y sufre el sur global. Como en los episodios anteriores, usamos elementos de la cultura popular para hacer el mensaje más accesible y a todo tipo de públicos, principalmente también enfocado a juventudes. El tema abordado en este episodio es tan complejo que por primera vez lo dividimos en 3 partes. Lo que verán hoy es la introducción y no diré más para no hacer spoilers. Quiero dedicar rápido un momento a agradecer a mi querida amiga y colega Joyce Paniagua, codirectora y co-guionista de este trabajo. Ella no pudo estar aquí hoy con nosotros, pero su talento y creatividad son el alma de este proyecto. Gracias, Joyce. También quiero reconocer al increíble equipo que lo hizo posible. Tenemos el gusto de tener con nosotros a Yuri Peña, la brillante ilustradora y activista detrás del arte visual que verán. Su talento fue clave para materializar la visión que Joyce y yo teníamos al elaborar el guión. Ha sido un verdadero honor poder trabajar con ella y en un momento le pasaré la palabra. Un agradecimiento a José Miguel Hernández Jaramillo, de Petenera, que ya presenté. Él colaboró en la producción y compuso toda la música de la banda sonora, de todos los audiovisuales y de este también. A Rodrigo Martínez, Héctor Mena y Montserrat Pérez, actores y actrices de voz que dieron vida a los personajes con sus maravillosas interpretaciones. A Avi Flores, Alejandra Lara, Johan Díaz, encargados de la animación. A Eric Mendoza en el diseño de sonido. Gracias por crear estos mundos en audiovisual animado. A Guapanguero Volador Films por su valiosa colaboración en la producción. Finalmente, bueno, gracias a ustedes por estar aquí. Y bueno, sin más, doy a la palabra a una maravillosa y talentosísima ilustradora, Yuri Peña, que por cierto, ella es creadora de estos maravillosos stickers que tienen en sus manos. Gracias, Yuri. No sé si tú nos podrías comentar un poquito cómo fue para ti este proceso creativo al crear este mundo que ahora, sin hacer tanto spoiler, pero no sé si nos quieras comentar algo.
Sí, claro. Bueno, yo no traigo texto, entonces tengo que hacer stand-up. Creo que el trabajo que vamos a presentar ahorita nos ha llevado mucho tiempo. Creo que todas las personas del equipo estamos muy orgullosas de cómo quedó. Efectivamente, como dice Eleni, toca temas como muy fuertes, como siento que cuando lo estábamos armando teníamos que solucionar escenas y así, pero ya que lo vimos así como todo de corrido, dijimos así de, estamos sobre todo como en este clima político, ¿no? Y como de todo lo que está pasando en el mundo. Son temas como bastante delicados, pero creo que con el guión de Joyce y de Lenny pudimos tocar como estos temas también como de una forma en la que no fuera como una cuestión, que justo siento que es como el corazón de la animación, que no fuera una cuestión como desanimante, como que nos desanimara y nos hiciera comprender como estos temas de una manera negativa, sino al contrario, ¿no? Que creo que lo bonito de todo el guión y todo lo que nos tocó hacer, o sea, a mí y a las animadoras, fue llevar esto como hacia, pues como una visión más optimista del futuro, que creo que justo ahora es lo que necesitamos. Y pues de los dibujos, me encanta dibujar, me encantó hacerlos. Ya no había visto los stickers como en vivo y están muy lindos. Este es otro trabajo que hicimos justo como tratando de llevar la ilustración y las imágenes hacia una forma de reflexionar como sobre el mundo. Y pues ya no sé qué más decir.
Pues yo creo que podemos ver la película. Nos vamos a retirar y entonces le pedimos al equipo técnico que pueda poner la película. Si nos esperan que nos bajemos para no tapar. Muchísimas gracias y esperamos que les guste y que lo difundan por ahí a todos sus compañeros, compañeras. Y gracias. Y disfruten este festival.
We're on the outskirts of a global south country. Global north and greedy sector, lackeys of the great beast, are looking to feed off these lands. They know they're nothing without them.
Excellent. Which way should we go?
To reach those savages, just head right and show no mercy.
To the right? My favorite side.
Mine too.
And mine.
To get their sustenance, they rely on deceit, disguising themselves as international cooperation, sustainable development, and philanthropy. But deep down, they're ruthless predators. They're on the hunt for their next victim.
Hello? Who's there? Oh, my good man, can we have a few minutes to tell you about the wonders of our master, the Beast? No, thanks. I'm busy. The end of times are near. Are you sure?
The end of times?
Yes, yours.
I beg your pardon? Oh, nothing. He says the times of the Beast are unfathomable. But who is the Beast? What are you talking about? The Beast offers you the goodies that you and your community have been looking for.
Voila! Look at this.
Oh.
Don't tell me you're not interested in economic growth or development.
Who is not interested in that? Well, you're in luck. You can become just like us. Really?
Move forward.
The leader of the Global South, seduced by the so-called development, has opened the gates of hell to his people.
Are we like them already?
The Beast and his lackeys won't stop until they dominate all Global South countries.
Voila!
I said no to them, but they brought on trade sanctions and then imposed a blockade on me.
Voila!
I also said no. They staged a coup.
Same here. I refused, and they launched a military invasion to set up the destructive mega projects. No!
Why are you invading the Global South?
This is not an invasion. We're acting in accordance to the law.
Yeah, our law. We're bringing progress. What are you talking about?
But you're using violence.
Come on. Progress isn't free. Although for us it is.
Yikes! What's wrong with your face?
The air of the global south dries out our skin. That's why we use masks to hydrate our skin.
Any other question? Oh my god!
Oh my god.
And that's how the Luckies infiltrated the Global South with their criminal measures.
This is just the beginning. The worst is yet to come. Now the Global South will truly know the ferocity of the beast. And that of its cursed Luckies.
Look how handsome it is.
Oh, such a dreamy eyes.
Oh, remember when it was just a baby? Greedy.
Oh.
Oh, yes. Our little baby. La la la.
La la la.
Don't be fooled. The beast was born out of greed, created by global north countries to dominate the world. It has many names. Destruction, Imperial Reaper, Exterminator, wealthy countries, USA, Canada, Israel, UK,
Australia, Japan, New Zealand, South Korea, Germany, Spain, Belgium, Switzerland, Sweden, Finland.
EU countries, and more.
So adorable. Greedy Sector, give it a little gift you brought.
Here you go, cutie pie.
The beast is the most terrible being on Earth and across times. The destruction it has caused is unbearable. On these plots run the DNA of imperialism and racism, patriarchy, militarism, capitalism, colonialism, and extractivism. Which is why it depends on the vitality of the Global South. Its lackeys, leaders, businessmen, and national elites have created a predatory economic system to satisfy its insatiable hunger with the lives of people and the planet.
Let the fire burn! The master is insatiable. Always hungry.
And I don't blame him, huh? I'm always hungry too. Hungry for money.
Hurry up and clean it up. It's dessert time.
Yes, almost there.
Not in our name! Stop imperialism!
Poor thing. Let's give it more global south to devour.
The end of times are here. Life on Earth can't withstand the beast genocidal and ecocidal crime. The lackeys don't seem to care. They're so dumb and greedy. They don't even realize that the beast is gonna take them down too. It's gonna destroy everything.
Muchas gracias al equipo de Petenera y a todo el equipo artístico. Es un honor estar aquí en la premier del nuevo episodio. Vamos a pasar al siguiente panel y tengo mucho gusto de invitar a las personas que nos acompañan aquí. Primero quiero invitar otra vez a Sherin Talat de South Feminist Solidarity, pero también fundadora y directora de MENAFEM. Adelante. Nos van a acompañar también en este panel Gonzalo Camacho y Max Isle. Y tenemos en línea también a colegas muy estimados y respetados que nos van a estar acompañando en la sesión. Voy a pasar al inglés para que las personas que estén en línea nos entiendan. Ustedes tienen aquí interpretación, entonces les invito a que utilicen la interpretación. En mi caso, Gonzalo va a hablar en español. Bienvenidas y bienvenidos. So I want to invite Sherin Talat, founder and director of MENAFEM Movement, with over 20 years of experience working at the intersection of social justice, economic development, and environmental rights. She is the founding member of the End Austerity Campaign, co-convener of the Women and Gender Constituency, in the MENA region. And also, she has been recognized as one of the top 10 influential voices on climate finance. So it is really an honor to have Shireen here along with us. And welcome, Shireen. I want to invite you to let us know why it's so important in the current world and the foundational economic roots of inequalities. Why is it that it is important to speak about feminist delinking, and what is your analysis of the source of crisis?
Thanks a lot for having me here today. Why it's very important, delinking, especially in this moment. Actually, Mexico knows the story. After independence, foreign debt became the new chain. Loans from European powers financed elite, not people. When payments stopped, invasion flowed, first by France, then by the United States. That was the excuse to control, was the goal. And that's why we need to delink, because our destiny is actually written under, with and behind closed doors. In the US, the IMF and the World Bank are writing our destiny, putting our path of development under the name of development. And that is not a policy, it is a power that is continuous link of colonialization by financial means, which Kwame Nkrumah spoke about years ago when he was mentioning the new colonial shapes, the new colonial spaces. Colonialism nowadays is not only taking the shape of tanks and soldiers, but it is taking shapes of institutions, financial institutions, using development as a claim to keep their hands, to keep our souls and bodies slave or part of the slavery chain that they are creating for us. The same story repeats itself across the global south. When the colonizer left, they redesigned and controlled through bank and markets. Today, the IMF and World Bank play the same role, enforcing public cuts and privatization as the price of stability. In Egypt, that now swallows most of the national budget. More than 60% of public spending goes to debt service. Health and education are sacrificed. Poverty rises while the military and creditors grow stronger. In Morocco, the same story. IMF-backed reform, cut social programs, and deepened inequalities. In Tunisia as well. Wages freezes, subsidies removals, silence workers, and democracy is a question. Across Africa and Latin America, more than half of all of our countries now spend more on debt than on people. Debt is the North way of collecting colonial rent. They extract through interest what they once took through force. And they still call it what? Call it what? Imagine. Call it development. They're extracting our life and call it development. That's why delinking must begin with the justice. We must name debt as a colonial tool. We must demand cancellation of illegitimate debt. And movement in Latin America and Africa and around the global south has shown that it is possible to build our solidarity system. In Latin America, from Ecuador citizens' debt audit to Mexico resistance of privatization, these struggles connect with ours in Swana, in Africa. They teach us that sovereignty is not granted, it is reclaimed. And we are here today in Mexico City not as not symbolic. It is the bridge between continents, a reminder that our liberation is shared. It changed us all, but together we can break it. So let's de-link from debt, from domination, from despair. Let's build economies centered on life and justice, not on extracting and bleeding. So let's stop that bleeding and rise together. Thank you.
I'm feeling very festive that we have solutions for our Global South. In times of despair, we actually are prey to the propaganda that says that there is no option. But we know that from the Global South, we have made many solutions from the bottom up, from our resistance. And so we need to celebrate that. We need to give up the idea that this is how things are, that we will remain in subordination forever. That is not true. There are solutions. And for that, I also want to say that we have feminist solutions. To speak about that, I will give the floor to Nancy Kachingwe. Nancy Kachingwe is joining us from Zimbabwe. She is the co-founder and coordinator of South Feminist Futures based in Harare, Zimbabwe. She has over 2 decades of experience working with international and regional NGOs in Brussels, Harare, Accra, and Johannesburg on a range of development policy issues, including trade and globalization, regional integration, land rights, women's empowerment, and climate change, with a particular focus on influencing policy and strengthening civil society and movement building. And let me tell you, she's a legend in the feminist movement in the Global South. So we are very proud to have Nancy joining us online. Nancy, can you hear us?
Nancy, ¿nos escuchas?
Zimbabwe is far, so if I have to shout, I'll shout.
The floor is yours, Nancy.
Tienes la palabra, Nancy.
Thank you. Greetings, 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 everyone from Harare. I hope internet connection will work. I hope interpretation is working. I am reading from a script, so I will try and also see any signs that from Zoom if anything is not working. Let me go. I think it's 10 minutes. Is that okay, Emilia? Oh, I'm not. Yes? Can you?
Sí, está bien, Nancy.
Yes, Nancy, it's okay.
Okay, thanks. All right.
Está bien, Nancy. Muy bien, gracias.
Okay. Good evening. Well, evening here, morning there. Greetings from Harare. I'm Nancy Kachingwe, based in Harare from South Feminist Futures.
De South Feminist Futures.
And thank you, Emilia, Denise, colleagues from Equidad de Género for bringing us together for this week of dialogue around the question of delinking, and also giving us time to dedicate ourselves to something that many of us in the Global South don't have the luxury or space to do, which is thinking, reflecting, debating on topics of our own choosing. So on to the topic, the concept of delinking was developed by Samir Amin in 1987. And it's part of a vast body of work by his and a long, illustrious list of scholars from the Global South that we usually refer to as post-colonial scholars, thinkers, and activists. The concept of delinking resonates in a world where we definitively can see the end of a post-World War II global order. And this has been an era of extraordinary change. While we try and make sense of the current moment, it's proved critical for us to all go back to this post-colonial scholarship, much of which since the 90s was dismissed as passé through narratives of a 20th and 21st century that is post-ideological, post-feminist, post-structuralist, and the end of history. But as the mirage of neoliberal globalization has been shattered, and the neoliberal mask of neocolonialism, the liberal mask of neocolonialism and imperialism has fallen, this post-colonial work has shown its enduring relevance. I'm hearing the interpreter at the same time, so I'm keeping it pace. It's critical today that we engage very seriously with this body of post-colonial work, particularly in a world where, as we feminists know well, radical ideas are quickly co-opted by the ruling classes to confuse movements for change, so that however deep their dissatisfaction with the status quo, they are not able to ground their demands for change in any clear, counter-hegemonic ideological framework. And we must absolutely honor and work to maintain the integrity of the work of those who expended their intellectual labor, blood, sweat, and tears towards creating a historically and theoretically grounded understanding of the world circumstances that we live in today. By this, I'm particularly referring to avoiding a situation where we allow theories and concepts that suddenly become fashionable to become all things to all people. As feminists, for example, we can offer a story of how the concept of intersectionality, with all the possibility of radicality it offered, was also easily remolded by liberal feminism into a wishy-washy set of ideas around diversity and inclusion that had little to do with challenging the imperialist capitalist political economy that governs our lives. So to move to feminism and delinking, and I just wanted to say that it's not about just trying to fit one set of theories into the other, but to preface that my understanding around feminism and the concept of delinking is about how these two ideas carry strong connections for shaping our future. Feminist theory and scholarship from the global South has always, in my view, adopted a posture of delinking. Obviously, first from cis heteropatriarchy, but equally from imperialism, capitalism, fascism, neocolonialism, and its extensions, racism, apartheid, and Zionism. So I can start. Is everything okay? Okay, I'll start by citing Audre Lorde as an example of feminist connection with delinking. I'll start by citing Audre Lorde's very famous assertion that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, written in 1979. I hear these feminists use this quote often because, of course, feminists are the only ones who cite other feminists. But how does this change how we do what we do and how we think? Audre Lorde states, "The master's tools may allow us temporarily to beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change." I'd also like to cite our beloved comrades from Dawn, Development Alternatives for Women in a New Era, who in 1985 at the Nairobi World Conference of Women were part of a fierce debates of what or what should not be included in a global women's rights agenda. This contention was most fierce around macroeconomic policy, more precisely around capitalism and neoliberalism, which at that time was referred to or came in the form of structural adjustment programs. Dawn's groundbreaking question, and often cited again on women's rights, was who needs a larger part of a poisoned pie? Dawn's argument was that gender equality for all can never be attained in an economic system that produces and reproduces inequality and exploitation. In other words, that economics and geopolitical economy as much parts of women's rights issues as violence against women or the girl child. The question, who needs a larger part of a poisoned pie, squarely sits within the logic of delinking as a necessary first step to the process of changing our global world order. I'd also like to cite Ugandan Pan-African feminist Sylvia Tamale in her book on decolonization and Afrofeminisms, who cautions that even for those of us who claim to be anti-colonial, colonial power is diffused in all of us, and that we are all victims of internalized colonization. Sylvia Tamale argues that decolonization requires us to confront the mechanisms of internalized colonialism, which include othering, invisibilization, binarization, universalization, and authoritative knowledges that, under the guise of science, legitimize the interests of colonialism by justifying discrimination. So not only have Global South feminists theorized the what of delinking, they have also theorized the how. So, for example, Sara Ahmed, a Pakistani-Australian queer feminist, in her Feminist Killjoy Manifesto, argues that to be a feminist, we cannot aim to please or make others happy. We must also be feminist killjoys. We must risk rebuke, ostracization for refusing, as women are demanded to do, to play the game of patriarchy, homophobia, racism, dehistoricization, or injustice to gain or keep a place at the table. Her Feminist Killjoy Manifesto declares, "I am not willing to make happiness my cause. I am willing to cause unhappiness. I am willing to support others who cause unhappiness. I am not willing to be included if inclusion means being included in a system that is unjust, violent, and unequal. Our job is not to accommodate others to fit in." And this is also feminist approach to delinking. "Look at you," she says, "a diversity poster child. I am supposed to smile. I don't smile." So we could spend the day examining so much feminist intellectual work and wisdom from the Global South, and even from before the 20th century, where women's liberation, freedom can only be delinked in a South feminist logic through a process of delinking. And from a feminist perspective, we have many, many stories to tell about how difficult and complicated a delinking position can be, not just against the powers that be, but often those closest to us. So to conclude, I would also like to add feminist scholarship from the Global South doesn't just contribute to understanding delinking. As feminists, we are also concerned about linking and relinking to make another world possible. Relinking production with reproduction, relinking labor with value, relinking humanity with nature. We are all human animals after all, although some of us, some are monsters. Relinking humanity through solidarity, care, and love, rather than through destructive social constructs of gender, race, caste, and ethnicity. All these are feminist propositions for delinking. And I wanted to raise these questions because Southern feminist scholarship and knowledge, academic, activist, popular, is always sidelined and as marginal in these big global debates, the broader questions about alternatives. I am resentful of how social justice spaces and movements continue today to be disparaging and dismissive of women, feminist, queer, Black, Indigenous, Dalit, peasant, and other marginalized voices. Too often, particularly when it comes to knowledge production, dominant heteropatriarchal leaders are more attached to holding on to the privilege and power conferred by the patriarchal social contract, even if it means relegating the fight for gender equality to the fourth division of a struggle league. So with that, I would like to offer some thoughts about the question of feminism and delinking and how the two fit together. But to end with an absolute, I guess, refusal that if it is not feminist, we will refuse to be a part of it. But as feminists, we have all the knowledge, the wisdom, and strength to move forward agendas for change. For those who want to join, listen, and open the space. Thank you.
That was incredible, Nancy. Thank you so much. You could feel it in the room. There is this traditional feminism called feminism of conciliation that are attempting to include women everywhere. And so just to let you know, we're challenging that. We don't want to include women, as Nancy said, in this system that is ecocidal, genocidal, generating inequality. We stand in solidarity, especially today with all the people in Palestine. We stand in solidarity with everybody who's facing genocides across the world. Mientras llega la interpretación, les quiero decir que hay un feminismo que se llama de la conciliación, que trata de incluir a las mujeres en todos los aspectos de la vida. Nosotras no somos esas, nosotras nos rehusamos a incluir a las mujeres en un sistema que es genocida, ecocida y que genera desigualdades. Y el día de hoy en particular estamos en solidaridad con todas las personas en Palestina, del pueblo palestino, que están enfrentando un genocidio bajo el proyecto apartheid, el proyecto imperial, que es Israel, que no lo reconocemos porque es un Estado impuesto en el territorio palestino, es un Estado colono que se tiene que ir, tiene que terminar el sitio, tiene que terminar el genocidio, terminar el apartheid y tiene que terminar la ocupación. ¡Viva Palestina libre! Y desde el río hasta el mar. Sí. Muchas gracias por esto. ¿Tenemos interpretación de vuelta? Do we have the interpretation back? Okay. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce here my dear admired colleague, Jason Hickel. He's a professor at ICTA UAB and visiting senior fellow at LSE. He's the author of The Divide and Less is More. He specializes in global inequality, political economy, and ecological economies. And we are very much looking forward to what his reflections on why a project of delinking is so needed in this world right now. Jason, the floor is yours. Welcome to the Festival of Delinking.
Thank you. First, thank you so much to Amelia and the other organizers for creating this event, which I think is extremely important and special. I'm very sorry that I was unable to be with you in person, but I'm thrilled to be able to join virtually. I also want to say thank you to Nancy for a really extraordinary presentation. I resonated with every word, and I fully agree that there can be no delinking that is not a feminist delinking. So what I want to do with my time is try to communicate a few very practical points about delinking from an economic perspective, a world system economic perspective. And I want to begin by describing the problem that we face with reference primarily to Samir Amin. Amin, but also other thinkers, pointed out that capitalism is never just a national system. It has always been a world economy characterized by an extraordinary division of labor between the core, which we often refer to as the global north, and the periphery, which we often refer to as the south. Now, in this system, the core states regularly intervene to reorganize production in the global south, in other words, the south's land and labor and resources, around servicing consumption and capital accumulation in the core, rather than servicing national development needs. So in other words, land that could be devoted to growing food for the local population is instead used to provide plantation commodities to the core. And resources that could be used for local development are instead siphoned off to Britain, Germany, and the US. The core states also actively seek to prevent sovereign development in the global south, partly in order to ensure that their resources are cheaply available to foreign capital, and partly also to ensure that the South remains dependent on imports of technology and capital goods or producer goods like machines and so on that are monopolized by the core states. Now, Samir Amin pointed out that this system is characterized by what he called unequal exchange. The South is forced to import necessary goods at monopoly prices, and to pay for this, they have to export massive quantities of their own artificially cheapened goods and services, thus producing a massive net transfer of value from the periphery to the core. This massively enriches the core, but drains the periphery of value and real resources that could be used for development. So this analysis helps us understand that there is nothing natural or inevitable about poverty and underdevelopment in the global south. It is an effect of imperialist dynamics in the world economy. The global south is not poor, it is rich. It has extraordinary productive capacities, extraordinary labor power, land, factories, and resources. The problem is that southern countries do not have sovereign control over their own productive capacities. Capital does, and specifically foreign capital. And the result is a massive misallocation of production to the point where, despite having high levels of global production to the point of blowing past several planetary boundaries, billions of people are denied access to even basic goods and services. So Amin called for a process of delinking. And for him, delinking meant two things. First, it meant ending dependence on the imperial core. Now, he was very careful to clarify that this was not calling for autarky or isolation. He was calling for a delinking from imperialist exploitation to end unequal exchange. Indeed, he actively encouraged South-South cooperation and trade. Second, Amin's concept of delinking was about delinking from the capitalist law of value, whereby production is determined by capital and organized around whatever is most profitable for capital. So the idea here for Amin is to align production with a new law of value, namely production should be organized around meeting human needs and national development. Now, how can this be achieved in the 21st century? What I want to do is lay out a few practical principles. The first step is to reduce imports from the core, which in turn reduces pressure for exports to the core and therefore reduces exposure to unequal exchange. This can be achieved by cutting unnecessary imports, such as luxury goods, right? While substituting necessary imports, where possible, with domestic production or through South-South trade. And ideally, you want to do this using swap lines to trade goods outside of the US dollar or the euro. Now, by the way, these options are increasingly available to Global South countries because of China. China has broken many of the core's technological monopolies and provides an alternative source from which Southern states can obtain necessary imports on much fairer terms. So the next step is that Southern states that issue their own national currency can rely on this mechanism to fund any projects that can be financed in that currency without needing to rely on foreign capital. They can undertake public works, establish universal public services, establish a public job guarantee, and train and employ all of the unemployed people in their territory in necessary activities such as building housing, sanitation systems, schools and hospitals, et cetera, without waiting for capital to decide that these things are worth doing. At the same time, it's necessary to use industrial policy to overcome the inertia of capital and directly invest in developing a sovereign industrial base, escaping from subordinate positions in the global economy and pursuing industrial upgrading. Now, of course, every country faces its own unique obstacles, and there's no one-size-fits-all solution for delinking. But this gives us a general idea for steps that can help to end unequal exchange and enable Southern countries to reclaim their productive capacities. Now, some of these steps may be prevented by IMF structural adjustment conditions or by the rules of foreign creditors. If so, then governments may need to default on their external debts. And as Thomas Sankara pointed out, they should do this collectively wherever possible to increase their bargaining power. Now, of course, there will be a backlash. The core states will impose higher borrowing costs and possibly sanctions designed to destroy the economy. But these pressures can be mitigated precisely to the extent that we are reducing dependence on imports from the core through delinking. We can also mitigate by nationalizing the major export industries to gain direct public control over foreign currency earnings. This can prevent a foreign currency crisis, and we can use the foreign currency reserves strategically to purchase the capital goods that are necessary for developing sovereign national industries and further advancing the delinking project. A final consideration is defense. We cannot underestimate the extent to which the core states are willing to use violence, including genocidal violence, as we've seen in Palestine, against any national liberation project. We've seen this many dozens of times in the past, and it is therefore necessary to establish regional defense alliances wherever possible, as Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have done with the Alliance of Sahel States. So a process of delinking along these lines can be extremely powerful. It can enable Southern states to escape imperialist exploitation, overcome underdevelopment, meet human needs at a good standard, undertake ecological transformation, and also achieve long-standing feminist demands for equality and social change. Freedom and dignity for the global majority requires a process of delinking and national liberation. And this will, of course, also be the process by which the colonial structure of the world economy that has so long dominated our planet will ultimately be dismantled. The true agents of world system transformation have always been the workers and the peasants and the students of the Global South, and this continues to be true today. This will liberate us from these travesties. Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to wrap up now. Unfortunately, I'm not able to stay for the discussion. I'll stay for a few more minutes, but I know that my comrades will do a brilliant job, and I'm happy to hand it over to them and learn from them what occurs. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Jason. That was amazing. I wanted to say that here from the Global South, especially from the region in Latin America, we do refer to anti-colonial and anti-imperial position. We're also anti-capitalist. I think for future discussions also on the linking, I think it would be interesting to see how different traditions coalesce and enrich themselves and what are our views. But definitely what Jason has been pointing out is that it's not enough just to tackle from the system from one point of entry. We need to have a comprehensive strategy, and he has helped us lay out some of the points of entry. So next, I'm gonna invite my dear friend Bhumika Muchala. She's was looking forward to coming here, but family issues came up, and also for purposes of the audio, Bhumika was kind enough to send us a video, but she's joining online as well, so she will be joining us for the Q&A. But let me introduce my friend Bhumika properly. She's a senior advisor at the Third World Network and part-time faculty in international political economy at the New School. She's a political economist and policy advocate and analyst with over 20 years of experience in international civil society, policy think tanks, and academia. And she's a very powerful voice advising the G77 in fighting the position of global North countries in all sorts of negotiations in the UN. So we are very proud to hear Bhumika's voice in this festival. Thank you so much, and please let us see Bhumika's video.
Hello everyone, my name is Bhumika Muchala, and I'm a feminist political economist with the Third World Network as well as the New School. I'm so excited to be here with all of you at the Delinking Festival. Thank you so very much for organizing this critical moment. If there was ever a time to be strategizing, discussing, and exploring delinking, it is absolutely right now. We are in an age of hyper-imperialism and the resurgence of the global far right, a natural consequence of capitalism and imperialism. We are in the crux of the climate crisis of the Anthropocene. We are witnessing a massive escalation of the military-industrial complex, genocide and war, migration crises with armed borders, and the age of artificial intelligence. This is underpinned by the neo-colonial logics and mechanisms of financial subordination, systematic extraction, discipline and compliance, and epistemic imperialism. These are the strategies and mechanisms of neocolonialism. They never faded. They have only become naturalized and systemic through the international financial, trade, industrial, and commodity architecture. It is time to dismantle these logics of financial imperialisms and the mechanisms that enact it. This can only be done through delinking and the strategies of self-determination that complete the political decolonization project of the past toward truly structural, material, and epistemic decolonization. I want to just touch on some of the logics that we are experiencing in the current moment from past colonial legacies that are being intensified. Drain is the first one. Drain or extraction of natural and financial resources, of embodied labor of the global South and the global working class, of brain drain and the disarticulation of a sovereign consciousness and vision of self, of community, of history, which our anti-colonial leaders and thinkers of the past, from M. Césaire to Frantz Fanon, all talked about. We are also in the intensification of the mechanism of hierarchy, monetary hierarchy, labor hierarchy, and the social construction of gender, race, ethnicity, caste, and citizenship that was a precondition for the colonial project of the past and the neo-colonial and imperial project of the current moment. Another key mechanism is the disciplining of South nations into maintaining at all costs an enabling environment for private capital accumulation, and the epistemic imperialism of neoclassical economics and financial market ideology, from GDP fetishism to the internalization of the contractionary Maastricht Treaty. At the core of neocolonialism is debt colonialism. Debt colonialism is perpetuated today by the deepening power and concentration of global financial actors, from Wall Street creditors and lenders to commercial banks and investment firms. Their power is maintained by the International Monetary System's currency hierarchy, which ensures cheap labor and commodities from across the global south. Debt colonialism also continues the colonial legacy of the disarticulation of national production structures across the South through processes of deindustrialization, from commodity plantations to mining to global value chains today that perpetuate the super exploitation of workers. The technique of disciplining states through repayment norms is executed through mechanisms such as the political denial and blocking of a fair restructuring mechanism for sovereign borrowers and the enactment of fiscal austerity measures and structural adjustment through which the most economically vulnerable communities, and in particular gendered and racialized bodies, become involuntary shock absorbers and facilitate the financial subordination of indebted states. The reproductive economy, through a feminist political lens, both preserves and sustains society at large. Feminist movements across the global South have always articulated how women's bodies and well-being endure the debt burdens of the nation through their appropriation of time, energy, and labor, are repaying their nation's debts. How do we de-link toward an anti-imperial movement building? How do we dismantle the colonial structures and the mechanisms which are so firmly embedded and entrenched in our global economies and in our everyday lives? Thomas Sankara said, "You cannot carry out fundamental change without a certain amount of madness." In this case, it comes from nonconformity, from disobedience, the courage to turn your back on the old formulas, the courage to invent the future. Indeed, we must dare to invent the future. What does this look like? It looks like structural transformation out of unequal terms of trade by decolonizing the global value chain. It looks like national and public development banks to borrow and lend in local currencies. It also entails continuing the processes of de-dollarization that have already started and the development of alternative units of account and common currencies to challenge US dollar hegemony. It looks like creating multilateral credit rating agencies and systems to challenge the structural power of the three dominant oligopoly of credit rating agencies. It also looks like the development of multilateral southern-based payment systems as alternatives to the northern-controlled global economic architecture, as well as the formation of debtors clubs and critical minerals clubs. Multipolarity provides opportunities today, but there is no way out of the necessity of internal popular mobilization and resistance. Alliance and coalition building must not fall prey to the prisoner's dilemma. It requires grassroots social movements that possess a critical mass to call on the state apparatus to demand and direct and hold accountable, to pressure the politicians and policy makers by not only reacting and resisting, but also steering the agenda, withholding labor, and articulating a clear agenda with concrete demands. For this, we have to build a coherent vision and agenda, a vision of reparative and sovereign equality that resonates with the principles of the new international economic order and that truly completes the past political decolonization toward a future of structural, material, financial, and economic decolonization.
Thank you so much, Bhumika. That was very impressive. She is always providing us a very key analysis of the macro structures. Bhumika has been key in explaining us when we are always saying, what about our elites in the global south? They're in alliance with the global north, and we just need to get rid of our elites. They just need to pay taxes, and that is it. But Bhumika is always reminding us that it's not that easy, that there are instruments in the global financial architecture that are actually blocking our governments and even our elites from stepping out of the pathways that have been taught to us. So for instance, when any actor here is trying to implement even ecological policies, we will be sued by companies from the global north, or a credit rating agency will also come to punish us. And so, and even if you recall the sanctions in Russia, the all of the money of the oligarchs was frozen also as well. So we must think deeper about what are the challenges, and Bhumika is a key voice in helping us navigate those disciplining financial tools that are operating against us. So thank you so much, Bhumika, for your words. I'm gonna move to my friend and colleague here, Max Eil. He has been working on the linking for many years and making very key inputs about how does that apply on the ground, especially in the complexities of our lives in the Global South. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Max here in this panel. Max is a doctoral student in the Department of Development Sociology at Cornell. No? No. Okay, do you want? His work focuses on and contributes to the study of historical sociology. No,
no, it's fine. I'm just not a student anymore.
Yeah.
It's been a few years. I wish I were this young.
But your work focuses on, and contributes to the study of historical sociology, environmental justice, agrarian change, planning, and heterodox Arab North African social thought. And his research is focused on the MENA region, particularly Tunisia. Welcome, Max.
Thank you so much. I wish I was still a student because I had fewer obligations and more time to read books. It's not the case anymore. So thank you so much for having me here and for putting this together. It's actually a bit hard to follow all of our speakers because they've covered everything. So I will try not to repeat and refollow the ground they already walked on, and I will just add in a few additional points. One thing that is very important to keep in mind is that the strategy of delinking was a rupture from the global law of value, and the global law of value reflected and reflects the interests of the northern monopolies, the northern capitalists, and their local allies in the third world. Accordingly, delinking rests on a popular development program, and a popular development program rests on a popular alliance of what Amin called the workers and the peasants. That is, he was abstracting precisely from the Chinese political struggle and economic development model. Now, of course, what Amin was saying in this respect essentially holds today, but what we can do and what we should do, particularly in the context of thinking about feminist delinking and also in the context of thinking about the ecological question, which is more and more urgent, is thinking about the fact that if the global law of value rested essentially on organizing an entire society so that the popular classes would receive very small wages and that all sorts of labor received essentially close to zero compensation at all, delinking, which would work through government programs, obviously, needs to rely on valuing appropriately labor in the periphery, all kinds of labor, in ways that are very much contrary to the interests of the northern imperialists and the domestic bourgeoisie. In this specific context, it would mean, for example, taking seriously the work of Lino Somé and others who have pointed out, following in the tradition of the Marxist feminist tradition, that social reproductive labor, that is the reproduction of human beings themselves, is first of all, of course, work overwhelmingly carried out by women, and second of all, it is work that capitalism cannot and does not fairly compensate. That is, that essential labor to the reproduction of human society is not valued And this is part and parcel of suppressing the wages of workers. That is, the patriarchal or gender contradiction is a primary constituent, a primary element that constitutes the labor capital contradiction. That is, to the extent that women or others who take on the burden of social reproduction in society actually are guaranteed a basic share of output, which we call wages, this itself has a transformative effect on entire societies, right? That is, insofar as the work of social reproduction of childcare, whether it's socialized or whether it's partially socialized, but insofar as it's considered part of the essential labor of the society. And so the labor, for example, of industry and the labor of child rearing are counted equally by a society in terms of how it compensates social labor, you will have a very different society in its very nature, right? And this also has to be put at the forefront when we think about what is a popular alliance of workers, a popular alliance of peasants and laborers. We also think about popular alliance of what is the role of working class women in that popular alliance. It's very similar to the ecological question in a certain sense, that capitalism and the imperialists and the neocolonialists do not account for the labor of the preservation or restoration of ecosystems. That cannot be included in capitalist calculations as they currently exist, right? And if a society values that, you have a more encompassing and holistic project of delinking, right? Now, none of this is, of course, all of this is complementary to actually increasing the social productivity of the society through industrialization, right? That is, allowing for a society to produce more and therefore able to distribute what is produced to all of the people of the society. Often industrialization goes to the wayside of a lot of our conversations, or a lot of conversations that are imposed on the Global South by Global North academics, right, who want to keep the South non-industrialized and non-sovereign. I think this is very important to keep in mind so that we organize ourselves ideologically to resist what is in fact a discourse of naturalizing underdevelopment. The last point I want to make, and I'm sorry for going over time, but everyone else talked about the topics I was going to talk about, so I got a little confused. The last point I want to talk about is the internationalist aspect of delinking. And what this means, in essence, is working from the assets that exist in the world system. There's not another world system that one can organize around in order to carry out a sovereign project that, again, reflects the interest of the popular classes. There's only this world system, right? And it has lights and it has shadows. This is not the world system where you had the Soviet Union and Maoist China, and it was very normal that communism was on the horizon. That world system does not exist, but that's shadows. But lights are that there is a wide-ranging industrial fabric in this world. The Western monopoly on technology has been decisively broken, right? So thinking about technology sharing or technological development is going to proceed in one way or another through coming to new terms, new agreements with the existing industrial powers that are not America and that are not Europe, namely Russia and China. That is, those will have to be taken as points of initiation, points of negotiation, but those are the powers that are capable of contributing to the technological development of the Global South, unless the Global South wants to completely reinvent the wheel of what technology, industry, and science and development looks like. And of course, this is not, I think, a recommended path. And so I think thinking about what that also means finally is a nuanced engagement with the national question on an international scale. That is, understanding that nation states are vehicles. That doesn't mean they're drivers, right? They're necessary vehicles and allies for the process of national popular delinking. They need to be engaged with, and they cannot be relied on their own to carry out these processes. They need to be pushed. They might need to be pushed hard, but the political sovereignty regime, which is under continuous threat by the US rogue regime and its mini-me's like Israel and its vassals like Europe. The political sovereignty regime needs to be defended aggressively against these forces which actually want to consume the political structures of global South states and feed them into their metabolism of accumulation by waste. And so this forces us to have a strong orientation to the defense of the existing state structures that are the fruit of the flawed but real process of worldwide decolonization as we think about delinking. So I'm going to stop there, and thanks so much.
Thank you, Max. I'm so glad other people talk about the issues you were going to talk about so that you would enlighten us in all of these nuances of the discussion. And I think from a feminist point of entry, we do have to wonder how does an industrial policy look like from the feminist lens, and we are wondering rather if we should transit out to a question on how to ensure the materiality of life through all of these dimensions, because otherwise we remain fixed in our imagination on how an industrial policy looks like from the traditional sexual division of labor. But lots of questions for us to keep on discussing as we embark on drafting our dream for the linking for the Global South and from capitalism. So I'm gonna give now, pass now to Andrés Arauz. Andrés Arauz was here in Mexico, but he had to fly yesterday. So he's actually very interested in joining this conversation moving forward. Andrés Arauz es un político y economista ecuatoriano que fue candidato presidencial. Fue ministro de Conocimiento, viceministro de Planificación y asesor en política financiera del Ecuador. Se desempeñó como director general bancario del Banco Central y se especializa en economía, tecnología, planificación, arbitraje inversionista, Estado e integración regional. Y Andrés es una de las voces más creativas que tenemos en la región en este momento para ayudarnos a generar una nueva América Latina, que es fundamental bajo las premisas que Max nos estaba diciendo de un internacionalismo en nuestro proyecto de ruptura. Vamos a poner entonces el video de Andrés, por favor.
Un abrazo caluroso a ustedes ahí reunidos y reunidas en el Festival de Delinking. Lamento muchísimo no poder acompañarlos, no poder estar ahí con ustedes, pero realmente les mando un caluroso abrazo y les deseo muchísimo éxito en esta jornada deliberativa y de altivez y soberanía que necesitan nuestros pueblos del sur. Quisiera comenzar indicando de frente que lo que necesitamos es una salida inmediata, contundente, sin arrepentimientos del sistema de arbitraje de inversionista e inversiones, conocido como ISDS en inglés, conocido como arbitraje, también ejemplificado por el CIADI, que es este centro internacional de diferencias relativas a inversiones en el Banco Mundial. Paren un segundo a darse cuenta y pensar que dentro de un banco, como es el Banco Mundial, existe un sistema judicial propio, como es el sistema de arbitraje de inversión, en donde no hay jueces, sino árbitros, es decir, que se les paga caso por caso, y en donde en el día son abogados de empresas transnacionales y a veces, de vez en cuando, un fin de semana, atienden estos arbitrajes que las mismas empresas enjuician a los países. Los estados no pueden enjuiciar a las empresas en este sistema, solamente las empresas pueden enjuiciar a los estados. ¿Y cuáles son las empresas? En un 99% empresas del norte global. ¿Y cuáles son los estados? En un 99% estados del sur global. ¿Por qué? Por haber osado, haberse atrevido a emitir regulaciones de carácter ambiental, laboral, en materia sanitaria, en materia de impositiva, en materia de soberanía de los recursos naturales. Por lo tanto, es indispensable que todos los países del sur, de una vez por todas, y en el contexto de una crisis del sistema de comercio e inversiones, nos salgamos del sistema de arbitraje inversionista Estado. ¿Cómo se puede salir? Pues una académica muy prestigiosa de la Universidad de Columbia, el Centro de Columbia sobre Inversión Sostenible, el Adam Merambar, ha explicado inclusive a detalle los pasos que deben seguir los estados para no renovar, dejar que se venzan y por otro lado denunciar y dar por terminados los tratados de protección recíproca de inversiones y también por supuesto la salida del CIADI. El caso de México es muy interesante porque si bien tenía muchísimos tratados de protección de inversiones en el pasado incluyendo capítulos de inversiones en el TLC de América del Norte, por otro lado no había sido miembro pleno del CIADI. Y cuando finalmente México se adhirió al CIADI, apenas 2 semanas antes de la culminación del periodo del expresidente Peña Nieto. Es decir, cuando estaba a punto de dejar la presidencia, dijo no, voy a entrar al CIADI para que de esa manera el capital transnacional tenga más poder y pueda enjuiciar al gobierno mexicano en un contexto de un posible gobierno de izquierda. Ahora, esto es una decisión dura, es fuerte, pero debe ser contundente. Y esto es indispensable hacerlo porque nos quita márgenes de soberanía. Los funcionarios públicos, las personas que finalmente en ejercicio de sus atribuciones gubernamentales se atreven a combatir el poder del capital transnacional, tienen en ese mecanismo no solo su impunidad corporativa, sino la posibilidad de amenazar y chantajear a los pocos funcionarios honestos que realmente se atreven a tomar decisiones en función de la soberanía de sus pueblos. Ahora, esto significa que para completar un proceso de delinking necesitamos privilegiar algunos aspectos. En el acta fundacional del Banco del Sur, 7 presidentes, hace ya más de casi 2 décadas, establecieron 5 prioridades que las llamaron las 5 soberanías. La soberanía alimentaria, la soberanía energética, la soberanía sanitaria, es decir, en los aspectos relativos a la salud, la soberanía de los recursos naturales y soberanía ecológica, y finalmente la soberanía del conocimiento, porque es indispensable para poder plantear todo esto que nos descolonicemos mentalmente. ¿Y eso qué significa? Que tenemos que utilizar instrumentos como los balances alimentarios y los balances energéticos para determinar dónde están nuestras principales vulnerabilidades, para no caer en dependencias. Y necesitamos construir soberanías individuales, colectivas, nacionales y por supuesto regionales desde el sur global. Ahora, cuando alguien se atreve a plantear algo así, no desde la mera retórica, sino con instrumentos concretos, con los pasos que se deben implementar para lograrlo, con la disputa por el poder frente al capital que esto significa, hay que prepararse para la retaliación, hay que prepararse con escenarios defensivos y necesitamos, por lo tanto, tener márgenes de soberanía frente a los asuntos donde tenemos esas dependencias y vulnerabilidades. Por ejemplo, en el ámbito financiero, ¿sí? Nuestros países todavía colocan las reservas oficiales, es decir, el ahorro que tanto le cuesta al pueblo, que finalmente termina expresándose en las famosas reservas internacionales, terminan depositándose en los países del norte. Y ya vemos lo que pasa a las reservas de los países que se atreven a cuestionar un sistema injusto. Terminan quitándole sus pocos ahorros. Por lo tanto, es indispensable diversificar los ahorros de las reservas oficiales, repatriarlos de ser el caso y por supuesto tener una práctica de manejo contingente listo siempre para actuar ante cualquier señal de alerta. Esto significa además ir cambiando la lógica de los sistemas de pagos internacionales para que no tengamos que mediar a través de bancos de Nueva York cada vez que queremos hacer transacciones entre los países del sur. Algunos que le han dado un nuevo apodo. Pero yo quiero decir esto no se trata de mera desdolarización, significa readecuar, cambiar, reformar el sistema de corresponsalía bancaria internacional. Y esto significa que más bien tenemos que propender hacia una des-JP Morganización de las finanzas internacionales, ya que ese banco es el principal actor en la compensación y liquidación de pagos internacionales por comercio exterior a nivel planetario. Entonces, esas son las salidas fundamentales que necesitamos actuar. Y por supuesto, un aspecto indispensable en el siglo XXI. Tenemos que lograr esa soberanía del conocimiento, por lo menos en algunos aspectos básicos. Y ahora las principales vulnerabilidades, como lo está demostrando la guerra comercial, es en el ámbito del software, en el ámbito de los datos. Necesitamos cumplir verdaderas políticas tajantes, draconianas inclusive, respecto al software libre. No podemos ser dependientes de software provisto por potencias hegemónicas del norte. Tenemos que utilizar software libre, tenemos que tener comunidades de desarrolladores nacionales y del sur global que nos permitan mantener actualizado nuestro software desde la óptica del sur y lograr esa independencia y soberanía tecnológica, por lo menos en un aspecto así, para que no nos apaguen el internet. Y por supuesto en el ámbito de los datos. No puede ser concebible que los datos públicos, estratégicos y de los ciudadanos de los países del sur estén siendo almacenados en data centers en países del norte, que como vimos hace pocos días, si Amazon decide apagar, pues estamos totalmente desconectados e incomunicados. Así que en un delinking que viene a ser pragmático y no meramente retórico, implica prepararnos para las retaliaciones que vendrán desde las potencias corporativas, principalmente del norte global. Les dejo con ese mensaje y un nuevamente gigantesco abrazo a todos, todas y todos ahí reunidos. Abrazo.
Fui a preguntar si estaba rápido el video y me dijeron, así habló Andrés. Pero un aplauso para las intérpretes que lo hicieron de maravilla. Voy a hablar con Andrés muy seriamente. ¿Qué candidato presidencial nos pone en estas tensiones? Voy a darle la palabra ahora al panelista final de esta discusión. Lo ha mencionado ya Andrés, que el delinking económico, el social, el industrial, el patriarcado, todo lo que nos imaginamos no puede ocurrir sin un delinking epistémico y cultural, sin una ruptura con los paradigmas mentales, los culturales, los epistémicos que se nos han impuesto. Y para hablarnos de esto, está con nosotras en esta sala Gonzalo Camacho, que es un lujo tenerlo aquí y nos congratulamos de que pudo acompañarnos. Gonzalo es profesor titular de la Facultad de Música de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. Imparte la cátedra en la licenciatura en etnomusicología y en el programa de posgrado en música. Y también realiza actividades de docencia e investigación de las culturas musicales en México. Pero lo más importante es que Gonzalo es una leyenda en el mundo de la etnomusicología y es un mentor de muchas generaciones de marcos que están, de personas que están trastocando los marcos para empezar a tener una mirada propia desde el sur y desde América Latina y desde México. Así que, Gonzalo, te dejo la palabra.
Muchas gracias. Muy agradecido con la invitación de Emilia de estar aquí compartiendo con todas, con todos, con todes estas reflexiones que son fundamentales para construir justamente esta nueva posibilidad a la ruptura. Me parece que estas intervenciones nos han ayudado a repensar que esta ruptura tiene diferentes aristas y en particular me referiré a lo que ya han mencionado los colegas y las colegas en relación a una episteme imperial, a una soberanía del conocimiento. Pues sabemos que dentro de todos estos procesos estructurales también hay procesos que construyen desde una episteme que nos impone una manera de ver el mundo. Y esta manera de imponernos una manera de ver el mundo, agregaríamos sobre todo los que estamos también abocados a las ciencias sociales y también al arte, una manera de sentir el mundo, una manera de oír el mundo, una manera de saborear el mundo. En ese sentido es que considero importante esta reflexión que también nos toca a nosotros, cómo podemos generar epistemes, otras, y llegamos rápidamente a considerar la posibilidad que ya se está generando desde diferentes ámbitos del sur global, que desde África, por supuesto también en la parte de Asia y en América Latina, de considerar una pluralidad epistémica. Es decir, no solamente es construir una nueva episteme, sino pensar también en que hay una pluralidad epistémica y que esta ruptura tiene que ver también con el reconocimiento de esos otros saberes que están también generados de una experiencia particular de vida, generados de una manera particular de vivir, de producir la vida, de reproducirla, y que también pueden ayudarnos a construir otros mundos posibles. Creo que este punto nos parece importante porque sabemos que parte de la reproducción del capital tiene que ver también con todos estos mecanismos que están insertos en las diferentes instituciones, desde las instituciones científicas hasta las instituciones financieras, en donde se está reproduciendo justamente esta episteme colonial. Sabemos que hay una ciencia instrumentalizada que ha retomado los conocimientos, la tecnología para aplicarla generalmente a los beneficios de la bestia, como veíamos en el video tan hermoso, y que de alguna manera pues también hay que romper con esta manera también en cómo se reproduce esta episteme en las escuelas, en las universidades y también, por supuesto, en el campo de las artes. Entonces creo que podríamos y deberíamos pensar en estas rupturas a partir de otras dimensiones que van a ir complementando, que van a ir sumando, a ir deconstruyendo este mundo, esta bestia, y que creo que también es importante pensar en una episteme que también tiene que ver con lo que algunos autores hablan ahora ya no de un multiculturalismo, sino de un multinaturalismo que tendría que ver en reconocernos, como decían también las compañeras y los compañeros, que todos somos parte de una naturaleza y que inclusive este cuidado de la naturaleza no implicaría solamente pensar en la lucha, digamos, en contra de la tala de los árboles, que por supuesto se hace, sino considerar que también nuestros entornos naturales son estos. Es decir, son los compañeros que están conmigo, las compañeras que están conmigo, son nuestros espacios. ¿Y cómo construimos entonces una conciencia que yo llamaría más que de nuestros entornos naturales como tal, sino de nuestros entornos de vida? Es decir, cómo construimos, cuidamos y reorganizamos nuestros entornos de vida que nos permitan también tener relaciones humanas que vayan en contra de esta episteme y estas maneras de sentir, que desde mi punto de vista son totalmente inhumanas. Sabemos que toda esta episteme patriarcal se centra justamente en la destrucción de la sensibilidad y de las posibilidades del emocionar mismo. Entonces, sabemos también que esta episteme colonial ha negado continuamente la emoción, la imaginación, este mundo que es tan necesario también para volver a suturar esta ruptura que se ha dado epistémica también desde hace mucho tiempo, en donde pareciera que, como se señaló hace ratito, se naturaliza la oposición mente, cuerpo, naturaleza, cultura, y que eso nos ha hecho, por supuesto, caer en un exceso de racionalidad, que obviamente lo que estamos observando en esta crisis es que esta racionalidad se ha convertido en la irracionalidad del mundo, la irracionalidad de la vida. Y entonces consideramos que hay que acompañar también este proceso de ruptura de nuevas formas también de ver, escuchar, sentir y saborear el mundo. Desde ahí me parece que el arte también tendría que estar vinculándose a este proyecto, a este gran movimiento de ruptura, porque también ahí están nuestras emociones en juego. Y tenemos el caso ahorita de un video que nos habla justamente de una dimensión artística que nos ayuda a repensar, que nos ayuda a considerar, a tomar conciencia, sí, claro, desde una razón, pero también desde la emoción. Y combatir de esta manera también esta ruptura, digo, esta episteme colonial que invalida todos los saberes, sentires y artes que no están dentro del norte global. De hecho, lo que aprendemos es que estas prácticas, por ejemplo, musicales, están vinculados al amor a la tierra. Que estas prácticas musicales, rituales que se han dicho que son supersticiones, artesanías, folclore, obviamente mercancías para el turismo, llenas de colorido, para quien quiera consumir exotismo. Sabemos que en el fondo estas prácticas, lo podemos ver, siempre están llenas de un agradecimiento a la tierra, a la Pachamama, a Tonantzin, a Gaia, y que tiene que ver con este vínculo amoroso y que desde ahí se defienden los territorios, desde una perspectiva distinta, no solamente desde una perspectiva racional de defender la naturaleza, sino desde defender algo que amamos, que es la tierra, que es la naturaleza. Y en ese sentido, esta episteme ha sido negada, por supuesto, pensar que somos irracionales, que tenemos un pensamiento salvaje porque pensamos que las águilas son nuestras hermanas, que los ajolotes son nuestros hermanos, que el agua es nuestra madre, que existe una sirena a la cual debemos honrar, cuidar, que existe el niño maíz, que como dicen las abuelitas, cuando las semillas del maíz están ahí y no las cuidan, lloran. Y entonces tenemos que recoger esas semillas, esa mazorca, y creo que en ese sentido ahí hay otras epistemes que nos ayudarían a reconstruir unas nuevas epistemes. Esta episteme que encontramos claramente en estas prácticas artísticas, en donde se dice somos mujeres y hombres de maíz, en donde nos consideramos justamente parte de este entorno y por lo tanto también el compromiso, la corresponsabilidad que tenemos entonces con todo nuestro entorno. Y por supuesto que cuando nosotros vemos, o desde esta perspectiva vemos el genocidio en Gaza, decimos, están matando las semillas de los hombres y tenemos que estar en contra de todo este genocidio porque también está afectando todo nuestro entorno natural. También es un etnocidio que está ahí y que nos afecta a todos porque esto está afectando a todo el planeta. Y en ese sentido quisiera acabar diciendo que algo que he aprendido mucho de esto es esta episteme que a mí me encanta porque me dicen, es que Gonzalo, tienes que tener en cuenta que todos los que vivimos aquí somos granos de una misma mazorca, aunque sean negritos, blanquitos, rojitos, pintitos, todos somos granos de la misma mazorca y por eso debemos cuidar todo lo que hace posible la vida. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Gonzalo. Yo veo aquí puros granos de maíz rojillos. Ya les vi. Empezamos un poco tarde por problemas de sonido, pero quiero invitarles a que vamos a hacer esto con un pacto con el panel que sigue, con maravillosas voces que vinieron desde muchos países para hablarnos, desde pueblos indígenas, desde otras regiones. Entonces les propongo que hagamos una pregunta para honrar este panel y que pasemos al siguiente y allí tendremos un poco más tiempo. También les quiero invitar, allá afuera hay café, hay unas cositas para que coman, pueden ir rápido y tomarse y regresan, o al final nos acompañan mientras estamos comiendo un poco con el grupo de Son Jarocho. Pero no quiero tampoco dejar de hacer espacio y honrar a quienes están aquí, llegaron tempranos, pero también a los que vienen. Entonces, si les parece, hagamos un pacto ustedes y yo, tomamos una pregunta para honrar este panel y nos vamos al siguiente. Entonces, ¿alguien tiene alguna pregunta que quiera hacer a nuestras personas panelistas? Que como ven, los temas son interrelacionados y vamos a poder hablar con los que siguen también. Por allá atrás.
Buenos días, soy Fabián Carballo, soy coordinador de la Red Mexicana de Predios Ambientales y bueno, hay muchísimas cosas que preguntar porque es la primera vez que he escuchado el tema, por ejemplo, de linking, etcétera, ¿no? Y hay varias palabras que están ahorita rebotando, que están como cayendo como cascadas, por un lado de linking y por otro lado la palabra regeneración, pero bueno, no acabaríamos. Sobre el de linking me parece muy importante porque precisamente ha habido muchos casos que los gobiernos han tratado de defender de alguna forma a las comunidades y los ecosistemas contra la acción de algunas empresas transnacionales y se ha visto que ha sido tremenda estas situaciones y se ha perdido mucho dinero. Concretamente, de alguna forma, ¿ustedes creen, en cuanto al delinking, ustedes creen que de alguna forma se logran algunas metas ambiciosas para lograrlo a un corto plazo o en qué horizonte nos encontramos? Y por último, una muy breve, relacionada con el doctor, supongo, es sobre el multinaturalismo. ¿Usted podría también darnos alguna entrevista relacionada con esto? Y ya, muchas gracias.
Sí, claro, por supuesto, con todo gusto. Y yo pienso que sí, que ya existen algunos trabajos colectivos que están dando cuenta de la necesidad y de la posibilidad de este delinking, de esta ruptura. En México, independientemente de que se están trabajando, en México tenemos el caso de los zapatistas en el sur, en donde tienen un proyecto en donde están intentando también romper con todas estas estructuras. Entonces, digamos que independientemente de cualquier cosa, hay proyectos que, por supuesto, se están trabajando, hay que seguirlos pensando, pero hay intentos en todo el mundo, creo, pequeños, pero creo que son sumamente importantes y esperanzadores.
Gracias, Max. Maybe Nancy, do you want to take up the answer? Take up the question. Can you hear me, Nancy? The question was, what is the timeline to achieve the linking?
Delinking is I think process, not goal in a certain sense. It's in any country of the third world, it's going to occur given the current balance of forces. You're looking at a 30-year time horizon, starting now at least, right? If we look at Amin's classic models, the reason they could only set in motion the process of delinking immediately is because they had huge, popular, legitimate revolutions which overthrew the old regime, destroyed it, ripped apart the landlord class, took state power, and set in motion a process of comprehensive economic planning. I'm totally in favor of that. I'm a communist. But these forces don't exist in our world really today at that level. The level of organization that would allow it, that would even allow the initiation of a process of delinking, that level of organization remains to be built, right? It just doesn't exist. It seems that there's a lot of barriers these days to that type of acquisition of state power with that degree of rupture. I mean, there's a lot of barriers. It's not clear that this can happen in the same way in most countries in our current world system. In a few countries it can, like Yemen, for example. But in most countries it seems very difficult. So the timeline is very long. I mean, the level of organization is low, and you need a very high level of organization to try to rupture with the law of value, and which would incur sanctions, which could incur a military blockade, and then to begin to reorient the domestic industrial plan, to redistribute the land. All of these take a very long time. I mean, even in agrarian reforms, they take, even a land to the tiller agrarian reform takes years to implement, right? To break apart the landlord structure, to carry out a sovereign industrialization of a country. It takes decades, right? So this is a long-term project of political organization, social mobilization, and economic planning that is on the scale of generations.
You forgot to say the most important thing. It is starting now. Thank you so much for our panelists. Thank you, Gonzalo. Thank you, Max. Thanks, Shireen, Nancy, Andres, Bhumika, Jason as well. I'm now inviting the chair of the next panel, Dina Musindarbeso, and the panelists, Corina Rodriguez, Esther Camac, Rodolfo Lajoy, Sara Madi, JP Arellano, Ned Daniel, Denise Iderege. Please come to the front, those who are here in person. Thank you so much. Para aquellas personas que quieran salir rápido, tomarse algo y venirse, háganlo, pero el panel va a empezar ya. También pueden esperarse y bailar con el son jarocho mientras se toman un café.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the second roundtable or panel discussion this morning, this early afternoon. My name is Dina Musindarezo. I'm a feminist activist working at the intersection of feminist political economy and feminist movement organizing. Really honored to be moderating this important critical discussion that is going to focus on radical economic pathways. And this is a panel of eminent speakers that come from different global South countries that have been working on the issues of delinking, the economic justice, and really thinking about ways through which we can transition and move away from the current economic system that is extractive, exploitative, that is violent to human beings, to our system, to our planet, and to really imagine and think about another way of life, another way of living, an economic system that centers care, that centers justice, that centers human rights, that centers life and planet, but also peace. And so I wanted us to, before we start, to ground ourselves and remind ourselves of a quote from a Black political feminist, Angela Davis, who says that you have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all at the same time. And these people here are actually people who have been reimagining but also doing at the same time. And I thought that invoking the spirit of Davis Angela is really a good way to ground ourselves, but also to remind us to be radical in our thinking, in our imagination, and to be courageous, because the current system as it is not one that we can continue with. There has to be another way. And we have people, luckily, that have been thinking about that question. And so I'm going to start by introducing our first speaker, who is Rodolfo Laho from Philippines, who has been working on sovereignty of state to decide on question of public services. And Rodolfo is from IBON International, which is an international global movement working on issues of global justice and economic issues, especially from the anti-imperialist perspective. And Rodolfo, you have the floor.
Thanks, Dina. I'm Rodolfo. Well, we at IBON International isn't precisely a movement. No, we are more of a organization supporting movements, no, through research, advocacy, and other ways, no, of supporting movement building. And it's hard to follow that first panel after laying down really essentially the political economic foundations of everything that we're about. So I would rather, like Max, no, what else could I say? No? So I decided to try to add a bit more, no, to what they said and what I think should we be also thinking about, no, in our countries in the Global South, who may not be in the same position as other countries right now who have left parties, no, in state power and are in a better position to resist, no. Well, we already know that this capitalist imperialist system is draining us, no, due to its relentless drive for profit, no, and it is now in itself in crisis, no. The video that we watched this morning, no, I think is a good way of saying that it is the right time now, no, as any, to slay this vampire for us to be able to live. No. Neoliberalism, the policy support, no, of this vampire, no, it's a zombie. It is dead. It should be dead, but it is walking. No, this is the world we live in. No, Jason Hickel. I was thinking that he would say this. No, but he was actually able to say in quantity terms, no, how much has been stolen from the Global South through unequal exchange. No? Through their work, they established that $152 trillion has been drained from the Global South to the North from 1960 to 2017. Where did this go? Where did these trillions go? The top three? Guess, 3 countries. US, Japan, and Germany, which he mentioned. No? So the US alone gained around 18 trillion from that span of a decade. No? And this stealing of wealth, looting of wealth, as some of our comrades would say, increased dramatically in rate in the decades of structural adjustment and the establishment of the WTO. When did this slow down? Jason Hickel and their comrades were saying. During the early 70s, when there were developmentalist states and national liberation movements. No? And this is where I bring up this importance of movement building to this day. No? We are still at a time that for us to delink as a process, we still need to think about winning those victories of reclaiming our own destinies and cutting the chains of imperialism in our own countries in the South. We already established that sovereignty is an alternative, and we should support indeed the countries asserting their sovereignty, no, against imperialism. But also in other parts of the world, sovereignty entails this long process of movement building and constructing the popular alliance that Samir Amin was talking about. Movement building to say the sovereignty of working classes, the farmers, indigenous peoples, women in struggle in our countries, no, who are the most interested in economic rupture, no, because they are themselves fighting the plunder of nature in our territories, fighting development aggression, no, the plunder of ancestral domains and lands. They are themselves resisting the low wages, the macho fascist patriarchal power, no, against women, no, in various parts of the world. So the linking also rests, as has been mentioned, on this popular sovereignty. And we should always remember that imperialism benefits from weakening and even destroying our movements in the global south, no? Trying to make us cower, no, in the face of this monster and fascism, no, the right-wing comeback, no. In other parts of the world, like where I came from, the Filipinas, no, issues that you may have been thinking has been gone in other countries which should have been belonged to prior decades, desaparecidos, killings, false charges, inflicting violence, no, are still issues against movements precisely wanting to establish national industrialization and genuine agrarian reform, no, who are against women's movements, who are joining broader national liberation movements in our country. So we should have sovereignty to plan, no, our economic paths, to say yes to public spending, to public health, education and transport systems, to socialize care, to regulate corporations, no, to have living wages for workers, to say that agriculture should feed our people, no, and not export, that we can construct industries to provide our needs, no, instead of feeding the machine of monopoly capital. We should be able to apply this, no, without being threatened to be bombed, cooled, or sanctioned. No. The US war machine should be stopped, no, for us to do this. No. Movement building, national liberation, and delinking are all interlinked and entails at some point weakening and destroying the US war machine, even in our countries. No. Because we know that one way of destroying our movements in our countries is through US imperialist aggression, counterinsurgency, counterterrorism, so-called. Without imperialism, we can flourish, no? Ghassan Kanafani was known to have said, imperialism has laid its body over the world, the head in Eastern Asia, the heart in the Middle East, which we would like to say now West Asia, no, and North Africa. Its arteries reaching Africa and Latin America. Wherever you strike it, you damage it, and you serve the world revolution. No? This we see today in the continuing liberation struggles, including for a free Palestine, which we should fully support politically, materially, and I believe my other comrades will talk about. No? So let us reclaim our destinies, free Palestine, down with imperialism, long live international solidarity.
Yes.
Viva!
Yes, viva! Yeah, and thank you so much. I think you have also reminded us the importance of centering movements, because also capitalism, the capitalistic, imperialistic systems we have recognize that at realizes that the center of change and transformation is social justice movements. And that's why we have to guard them jealously and make sure that we remain strong. That's why we are here. That's why the delinking is also centering, a strategy of building a global movement that is going to bring about transformation. So thank you so much, Rodolfo, for that. And now I would like to invite Neth, who is going to be our next speaker. So Neth Dano is a researcher from Philippines working on food sovereignty and technology justice. And Neth, this morning will be speaking about technology monopoly and delinking. So you have the floor, Neth.
Thank you, Dinah. And thank you very much for the audience for sharing your morning with us. And just to emphasize that a number of our speakers in the first panel actually highlighted the central role that technology plays in the whole delinking project, and that's what I will going to highlight in my presentation. As we all know, under capitalism, technology is developed and used mainly to serve capital's interests rather than the needs of humanity. That's the sad, tragic fact. Technology has become a tool for capitalists to increase control over labor, extend the working day, and suppress workers' resistance. Technology and technological innovation develop under capitalism as a means by which capital can seek to replace costly and rebellious human labor with automated machineries which can theoretically bring labor cost. Tons of studies showed that it's not true. Samir Amin himself viewed technology as a critical tool for global monopolies. That's why our speakers earlier said that it's an important component of the whole delinking project. those global monopolies develop mainly for profit accumulation, not for people's welfare, and definitely enabled by property rights. We see this very clearly in the north-south direction of conventional traditional transfer, where most of these technologies are developed in the core, in the north, and exported to the south, who use them for whatever, never mind if the realities actually don't need that. Like, it's a common feature, you know, in our mind, like when we say technology, like in farm and agriculture, that's tractor. In my part of the world, farmers don't even call tractor. They call them Kubota, which is the brand, the Japanese brand of smaller tractors. And if you go to the plantation, that's John Deere. You know, they don't even call this the generic machine, but the brands of the northern core. In the sweatshops that produce all this cheap, commercial, fast fashion, it's actually the machines developed from the north that have become the symbol of oppression of women whose life, blood, sweat have actually enabled this kind of consumerism that is fueling the elite of the South and also the North. Even if we go to commercial products, like in my part of the world again, many people won't even call toothpaste. They will say, "Do you have Colgate?" So that's not even ours. It's Colgate's. Every nuts and bolts, even paper clip, nails come from outside, increasingly from China as an alternative core, but mainly the more sophisticated, expensive nuts and bolts for you to repair, to do something in your farm, in your home, comes from Germany, comes from the north. And we now live in a world where a handful of transnational corporations dominate global markets in every single industrial sector. Take, for example, food and agriculture. From seeds and agrochemicals to farm machinery, to retail, to commodity trading, are actually controlled by a few, very few. In fact, when you talk of seeds, only 4 companies dominate 60% of the market. 75% of the market is controlled by the same companies that control the seeds market. And how did that happen? It's not just because it's the natural accumulation of capital, it's mainly because of technology. Like these companies control intellectual property rights, trade secrets, copyrights, industrial design, name it. All forms of industrial intellectual property rights and industrial enclosure to stamp their ownership and regulate access to that technology. And lo and behold, these companies establish oligopolies. I would say establish consciously because they exchange licenses, they share their scientific researches through joint ventures and scientific collaboration. So monopolies, yes, and oligopolies because it's agreed among themselves that they will cooperate, and they call that scientific cooperation among themselves, to develop and control and regulate access to these technologies. We are now at the threshold of the so-called Fourth Industrial Revolution. Technology is not just central, but has become the holy grail of capitalism beyond what Marx and Amin have ever imagined. Not only has digitalization exterminated jobs and the skilled workers, we as peoples have become both the product and the source of data. Ford and Rockefeller have been replaced by far more ambitious, vicious, and soulless gods of technology who view competition as only for losers. That's Peter Thiel, the founder of PayPal and Palantir, that developed Lavender technology, and where's Daddy for Israel, the genocide in Gaza. And those who think that empathy is a fundamental weakness of the Western civilization. That's Elon Musk, in all his pride, saying that empathy is a fundamental weakness of Western civilization. Competition is indeed only for the losers. In the tech economy, where the winner takes it all and where breaking things fast is the norm, that's Mark Zuckerberg. It's the model for rapid innovation and disruption regardless of who gets hurt or ruined as a consequence. These winners who took it all white men from the North, comprise 8 of the 10 richest people in the world whose combined value of wealth is at $2.23 trillion as of last month. These men are lionized in dominant narratives as geniuses and messiahs who will save the world from damnation without even acknowledgement of the teams and communities of innovators and workers who were part of the creation of these technologies and on whose backs these innovations are built on. The technology where the wealth of these tech billionaires is built on and thrived on the systematic looting of data that feed insatiable machine learning, that train more and more powerful AI, that are in the race to perform better than any of us, than the best of us, based on algorithms designed by the lords of Silicon Valley. As we talk of clouds and data, the material cost of digital technology and AI are often lost in the noise and excitement, just as concerns about environmental and climate cost of dependence on fossil fuels was rarely part of the equation in the 3 industrial revolutions before. Only recently, when the world is already deeply addicted to social media, dependent on digital gadgets and apps, and enthralled with what ChatGPT can do at the expense of our brain cells, did it come to light that the cloud means giant data centers that grab agricultural lands, compete for fresh water, for domestic and farming uses, and require massive energy supply to run 24/7. That the batteries for EVs and digital gadgets, wind turbines and solar panels need critical minerals and rare earth minerals needed to be mined from ancestral lands of indigenous peoples and local communities and cause runoff that destroy farmlands. Yes. Assertion of data sovereignty in the era of insatiable extraction of data by big tech platforms is fundamental to stop this systematic looting and siphoning of invaluable resources. Last sentence. Technology justice is built on the recognition on the role of peoples as users of technologies and as active participants in decision-making on what is needed to address our actual needs and realities. Mechanisms that assert digital sovereignty and technology sovereignty by pooling technologies from diverse sources of knowledge across the South should be part of the Delinking project. So, thank you for extending my time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Neth. Really showing us how technology that has been sold as something that we all need, can't survive without it, and yet it is still an imperialistic tool that is still exploiting workers in the interest of capital. So thank you so much for that. And may I remind my speakers, my panelists, that each one has 5 minutes. Please try and keep to 5 minutes. I know it's really hard to share with us a vision for transformation in 5 minutes, but I know you can do it. I know you're brilliant enough to do that. So now I would like to invite the third speaker for this afternoon, and that is Sarah Mahdi, who is... So Sarah is a degrowth researcher, a political ecologist and human rights activist whose work links politics, economics, and ecology to confront genocide, fascism, spurring inequality, and social injustice. She's trained in environment and development anthropology with a recent focus in degrowth policy pathways, and currently at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. Yeah, so Sarah is going to talk about degrowth and delinking. You have the floor, Sarah.
Thank you, Dina. I want to again thank Emilia and Equidad de Janeiro for bringing me here for Mexico and Mexico City. What an amazing, rich culture. I have embodied being corn, so I'm going to go back to London feeling like a dough ball of corn and I will die for Tlacoyos. So I just want to introduce myself, and also I will be representing the Degrowth and Delinking Collective here, which was formed after the International Degrowth Conference in Pontevedra in 2024 after an intervention from Emilia. So this collective, it convenes organizers, scholars and practitioners and learners from all over the world within and beyond the degrowth community. So after this session, if you would like to join it, please catch any one of us. And we meet monthly via a WhatsApp hub, and we use leverage from within the Imperial Core to center, support and strategize with the demands of the Global South and the marginalized. So this is a space for collective knowledge generation. So thank you, Emilia, again. Yeah, so the world we're in right now is organized to kill and extract, and we have a genocide in Palestine in plain view with US cover and European complicity. And there are very many ways to say this, but I think the panel before us clarified with lots of facts and theorizations that we are in a shit show. And, you know, Oxfam and many others have shown the 5 richest men, they've doubled their wealth since 2020, while the billions have gotten poorer. And this is obviously not a bug or a glitch in Western capitalism. This is the operating system. And the hunt for economic growth in rich parts of the world is putting humanity on course for suicide. And this is a catastrophe that is already being felt by the Global South, vulnerable population groups whose existence is affected by this ecological and net drain collapse. So among all of this, in the midst of all of this, what is degrowth? You know, it's essentially a critique of the West's tireless hunt for degrowth. And degrowth refers to a decline in economic activity that is democratically planned for social justice and intended to improve global well-being. Now, what does this mean? So it's not a recession. It's not austerity for the already poor. We cut waste at the top, so luxury emissions, throwaway tech, fossil military industrial complex, and then we expand what makes life good, to put it simply: public transit, housing, food, healthcare, care, clean air, shorter hours, and a real democracy. So if GDP dips but life gets safer and fairer, that's success. But why this now? Because the growth model and the US-led West sold the world and is burning the planet and locking in inequality. So when profits shake, the answer from Washington and Wall Street and NATO is never about care, of course, because this is by design. It's sanctions, it's coups, it's wars. And I think Latin Americans are most aware of this in this moment right now. So this, as we all know here and now, and also what the Rise Up series have demonstrated really well, I think everybody should go and Google them and watch them. They demonstrate this phenomenon really well. Is, you know, it's not development, it's imperial crisis management, and this is all by design. It's meant to be this way. This is not something that has gone wrong. So for the Global South and for the majority world, for us, the lands are lands whose resources, labor, and cultures subsidize this Western and European comfort. This conversation can feel very, you know, lukewarm, like why degrowth? You know, it can feel very underwhelming and not enough, and also violent. So if degrowth is to become a project of collective liberation rather than a regional lifestyle choice, it has to be braided together with a framework and strategy called delinking, which the panel before had expanded on. So it was coined by Samir Amin, and it means that the periphery stops taking orders from the core. So it's not isolation, but it's sovereignty. And the Global South sets its own priorities: food and energy sovereignty, public control of essentials, industrial policy for need, South-South cooperation, tech on your terms, and you neutralize the levers the core uses, that is debt, dollar dominance, trade rules, military bases, and missiles. So these two, degrowth and delinking, they belong together. They met on a dating app called Our Burning World, and they belong together, you know. It's not perfect, but that's just how it is. Yeah, and degrowth without delinking lets the North go green by extracting even more from the South, and delinking without degrowth risks copy-pasting extraction under a new flag and name. So the formula is that we downshift and downscale the core, autonomy, dignity, and sovereignty in the periphery. So let's name the crimes. Okay, oh my God, okay. Palestine is the clearest window to the US imperial order, a US armed, US shielded settler regime carrying out, genocide with European complicity to secure land, choke points, markets, and a laboratory for weapons and surveillance and what's to come in the future. Venezuela shows another imperial tool, regime change by spreadsheet. Sanctions are a collective punishment designed to wreck medicine, food, investment, and then they point and say, see, socialism fails. So the point is not democracy, it's to discipline the South consistently. And delinking says that we reclaim these monetary tools, control capital flows, and trade on living terms and refuse Washington's veto over our future. So if we zoom out to unequal exchange, which is the theft at the heart of Western capitalism, the South exports cheap labor, land, minerals, emissions, space, and the North imports the benefits and sends back debt and more sanctions and rules. So the leash is also money. If your currency and payment system are controlled from the outside, the dollar, the euro, the CFA, and your budget is serving creditors and not communities. So delinking means monetary sovereignty, public banking, capital controls, and the power to fund clinics and food instead of kneeling to bondholders. So I'll skip over because I have 1 minute and I'm getting nervous. But yeah, essentially for Europe to break the fossil NATO complex, we have to stop sanctions that starve populations and materially degrow, less throughput at the top and more security for everyone. So what I want to say is that the South is not poor. We are not poor. We have been systematically drained and we are systematically impoverished. And we possess the fertile land, abundant labor, and the bulk of the planet's critical minerals, and yet we lack sovereign control over these capacities. So a truly global degrowth must therefore dismantle extractive contracts, cancel odious debts, transfer technology under Southern control, and let us be frank, end the military-industrial complex. USA, EU, and Israel's ongoing devastation of Palestine is how resource flows are controlled. A degrowth that ignores the military-industrial complex is just theater. And again, just to say what we're witnessing in Palestine is a genocide. It's also the most violent enforcement of the global capitalist order led by the US. And delinking means breaking dependency on this imperialist core. It is not just about economic autonomy, it's about political, cultural, and military sovereignty. And for Palestine, delinking means dismantling the entire system that allows Israel's settler colonial project to be armed, funded, and legitimized. Yeah, so delinking is not abstract, it is material. It means resisting the economic and ideological machinery that makes genocide profitable and normalized. And the capitalist world system and the liberal political order cannot provide any material security to the majority, and it cannot stay within planetary boundaries. So its legitimacy is eroding. This is a falling castle. And in that turbulence, our struggles, Southern struggles for autonomy, are the decisive agents of transformation. And the North's duty is very clear. It has to decenter itself, relinquish imperial privilege, and become a genuine partner in building a multipolar ecological civilization. And remember that we are not a minority, we are the majority. The peoples of Africa, Asia, Oceania, Latin America constitute to 85% of humanity and an even greater share of the future. So if we organize, if we delink, if we pair northern degrowth with southern sovereignty, we can redirect the planet's abundant resources away from imperial accumulation and toward collective flourishing. So delinking is the strategic fulcrum. Justice-centered degrowth is its indispensable ally. Muerte a los Yankees, maldito sea Estado de America and Israel. Free Palestine. Fuck USA, fuck Israel.
Thank you. I think it is also difficult way to disrupt Sarah when she's speaking with so much passion and really giving us, what is really tangible in terms of what we need to move away from and where we need to be. So thank you so much, Sarah, and also for reminding us that, transformation is also about rewriting the narrative, in terms of what we have had for a long time, that the South depends on the North, but actually it is the other way around. We have the voices, we have the resources, the labor, the minerals, even the technology, but yet we continue to hear that, we are dependent, and we need to be independent, and we need to be autonomous, and we need to be sustaining ourselves. Yes, we do need all those things, but actually the North depends on the South. And I think DRG is going to come in also from that perspective, really talking about tax justice and the extent to which the global North continues to take away the resources that should have been used for our own development, for our own public services that are needed, and really to change the structure that sustains that. So I have the honor to introduce Derge Almaye, who is a coordinator of Global Alliance for Tax Justice, which is a Southern-led global coalition. Derge comes from South Africa. No, Derge comes from from Ethiopia. Sorry, I'm not giving it to South Africa. Definitely not. You are going to remain in East Africa. But the most important thing is that DRG comes from the global South and is part of the movement that is working towards the liberation of the global South. And we'll be speaking about how tax justice can contribute towards alternative economic pathways. DRG, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I wouldn't mind coming from South Africa. Let me introduce my KP. It resembles the MAGA color, but I'm not ready. I'm not ready to renounce red color to these idiots. That's why I insist on carrying. It says "Stop the bleeding." It is the slogan of a campaign in Africa against the plundering that is going on. If you listen to the mass, if you follow the mass media. Africa is portrayed as a continent that is living on the life support coming from the north. But if you look into the matter, Africa is a net exporter of capital to the rest of the world. Even not denied by mainstream research, for every $1 coming into Africa, $3 leave the continent. This is done through it is not without calculating the plunder, the centuries-long plunder. It is just by the daytime robbery carried out by multinationals operating in Africa. So that is the story of my So tax justice actually is a reformist movement. It is, if you say people should pay taxes, multinationals should pay taxes, the rich should pay taxes according to their income, you are not asking to abolish the system. You are asking those who are benefiting to abide by the laws that work for others as well. So even that is not being respected. And usually the infamous quote of Thatcher, "There is no alternative to capitalism," is today accepted by the so-called realists and reformists. They are not ready to tax. That is why they introduce austerity. If you look at the amount of, if you look at the tax evasion and avoidance by multinationals, if you look at the lack of wealth tax in most countries, you will see the amount they are not ready to tax the rich, to tax multinationals. Not only that, they subsidize them. If you look at the subsidy given to even fossil fuel companies, you will see the money goes there. If you come to Europe, the money is there to beef up their so-called defense budget, but they have no money when it comes to funding social services. So austerity on this side and subsidy and allowing tax evasion and avoidance with impunity. Just to give a recent example, in France they are discussing about a 2% tax on the wealthy with 100 million euro assets and above. That is being that is being blocked by the constitutional courts and by the ruling elite. And in fact, one ruling of the Constitutional Court said taxing them by 2% is expropriation. But if you look at what is happening in the austerity program being introduced, these cutting everything in social services and refusing to tax the rich. So this is what tax justice is, at least, you know, as a reformist movement, is just to say, make multinationals and the rich pay like the working people. That is not revolutionary, but that is not even what reformists are not ready to do. And there is something about reform. It is an illusion that reformists succeed. It needs a radical opposition for reforms also to take place. If there is no threat to the system is not ready to reform itself. That is why a radical opposition, a threat of delinking rupture is the best word, I think. If you go back to history and see when reforms have been successful, it was only when radical social transformational movements were strong. That is why they are now shameless and arrogant to make even the basic reforms, because the so-called reformists have surrendered. They have become the servants of the system. And previously, actually, the state was given to the agents of the millionaires and the rich. Now they are physically taking power, and they are not ready to tax themselves. So unless there is a strong movement, a radical movement that attempts to supersede the system, there is no possibility of also getting reform. So let them call themselves realists, but they are repeating what Thatcher said. They are saying there is no alternative, but we have to say there is alternative. And only by threatening with alternatives can we also at least get reforms. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Deje, for that, and really for reminding us that even with the current system, it still enables those that are taking advantage of the current system to not even do the bare minimum, because paying taxes from what you have presented is really the bare minimum within the current system that has been set by the Global North, and so, but also a call to move away from the reformist agenda to a revolutionary agenda. So thank you so much for that inspiration. And now I would like to go to JP Aliano. JP Aliano is an activist, a co-founder of the International Degrowth Network. And JP uses communication to bring about transformative change, mainly focusing on the anti-imperialism, political ecology, and delinking. And JP will be speaking about degrowth and delinking with a focus on Mexico. You have the floor.
Thank you, Dina. For anyone that doesn't speak Spanish, I'm gonna shift over, so if you need to put on your little interpreting bits, yeah, now is a good time. Hola a todas. No puedo explicarles el honor que es estar aquí y a platicar con ustedes sobre temas tan importantes, en compañía de gente absolutamente, de gente absolutamente increíble, inspiradora. Y primero, antes que nada, quiero decir muchísimas gracias a las organizadoras, a Emilia, a Equidad, a la Secretaría de Mujeres, todos los técnicos, las interpretadoras y obviamente a ustedes y a nuestras camaradas en línea por estar aquí con su apoyo y su solidaridad. Yo voy a intentar de traer el tema de lo que hemos estado hablando y de que mis compañeras han estado hablando un poco más enfocado al local, a un poquito más a México y a nuestra ciudad. Y entonces, bueno, quiero empezar platicando un poco de nuestra ciudad. Aquí en la Ciudad de México es abundantemente evidente de que tenemos zonas con muchísima riqueza, al ladito de barrios extremadamente pobres. ¿Y dónde creemos que tienen apagones, falta agua, la inseguridad es alta? Pues obvio en las zonas pobres. Y esto no es mala suerte o porque la gente ahí se lo busca o porque son flojos, no, para nada. Es porque el sistema está armado así, porque así es como debe de funcionar. Y obvio, pues bueno, a veces en mi discurso tenía ¿qué sistema? Obvio no están preguntando qué sistema porque ya saben de lo que estamos hablando, pero bueno, el capitalismo imperial. Y bueno, pues por lo menos la gente o los medios dicen que es democrático, ¿no? Votamos por él cada 6 años y no importa quién está en gobierno, el capitalismo sigue, ¿no? Pero la verdad no podría ser más lejos de la realidad. Piénsenlo así, en la economía, o sea, en qué se produce, para quién y con qué recursos. Ahí la democracia no existe. O sea, imagínense, piensen en la última vez que sus jefes les dejaron tomar decisiones importantes, por ejemplo. O sea, me imagino que nunca. Los que deciden son los bancos, las grandes empresas y ese 1% que concentra la riqueza. Y su objetivo, la ganancia, ¿no? Hacer dinero. ¿La vida? ¿La restauración ecológica? Ni madres. Y por eso se sobreproduce lo que deja dinero rápido, ¿no? Coches de lujos, jets privados, fast fashion, inteligencia artificial, carne industrial, armas, etcétera. Todo eso con daños extremadamente incomprensibles, ecológicos y sociales. Y, obvio, no queda para lo demás y se subproduce lo que la gente necesita. Vivienda asequible, transporte público limpio, renovables, alimentos sanos, clínicas, salud, educación. Y entonces, con esa lógica, ¿cómo nos pueden decir que más crecimiento de la economía, lo que nos dicen todos en poder, que es nuestra salvación, que eso solo agranda el daño, ¿no? Y deja necesidades sin cubrir. Y entonces, si tomamos un paso para atrás y miramos al mapa mundial, el sistema, como lo han dicho mis camaradas, se sostiene con el intercambio desigual. Acabo de ayer encontrar un buen papel con cifras de México. Trabajamos y producimos aquí, pero una gran parte de ese valor se va al norte. Tópense esto, en el 2022, el drenaje de valor por la maquila de exportaciones a Estados Unidos fue de $128 mil millones. O sea, alrededor del 11% del PIB de México. Imagínense lo que podríamos hacer con ese dinero. Así, exactamente así, se alimenta el crecimiento del norte, ¿no? Pagando muy por debajo el trabajo del sur y aunque la productividad sea comparable y apropiando recursos como el agua, la tierra, los minerales, el labor, la energía, etcétera. Y obvio, como ha quedado muy claro con mis camaradas, esto es global, ¿no? No solo es México y los gringos. Y este orden se normaliza y se impone, con reglas y con fuerza, con las recetas del FMI y el Banco Mundial, las normas del OMC. Ellos volvieron natural o normalizaron abrir nuestros mercados a la privatización y recortar lo público. Y cuando no alcanza la norma o cuando la gente se rebela, aparece la coerción, la violencia de un aparato militar y de seguridad liderado por Estados Unidos y sus estados vasalles para mantener la jerarquía global donde el occidente gana todo y el sur pierde. Esto es un sistema sostenido por la violencia real y como hemos visto en cualquier movimiento hacia la soberanía, el socialismo o la liberación nacional, cada vez los matan, los asesinan, hay cambios de régimen, invasiones militares, desde el genocidio en Palestina y Sudán hasta los asesinatos de Thomas Sankara y Salvador Allende. Cada vez. Y entonces, bueno, otra vez, a lo local, ¿qué puede hacer México? Nuestro país tan lindo y bonito. Obvio, mucho más fácil decirlo que hacerlo, ¿no? Pero creo que todos reconocemos y están aquí porque saben que las cosas tienen que cambiar y tenemos que hacer algo, ¿no? Entonces, en mi opinión, nos deberíamos enfocar en la soberanía, la democracia económica y el decrecimiento de industrias dañinas. Soberanía para decidir aquí sobre nuestros alimentos, energía, agua, tecnología, finanzas, comercio, etcétera, ¿no? Para cortar esa dependencia, ese vínculo a Estados Unidos y al norte que vacía de nuestra riqueza abundante. Segundo, la democracia económica, para que la producción responda a la gente y a la ecología, no a la ganancia y a la acumulación de poder y riqueza. Entonces, esto incluye mecanismos de finanzas públicas junto con obras públicas que nos permiten organizar directamente nuestras capacidades productivas en torno a los objetivos sociales y ecológicos necesarios para nuestro país. Como dije antes, vivienda digna, transporte público, agroecología, renovables, salud, educación, etcétera. Y, en tercer parte, el decrecimiento de los sectores de lujo y alto impacto, fósiles, autos gigantes, megadesarrollos especulativos, etc. Esto sería posible con la nacionalización de industrias orientadas para la exportación y guías de crédito obligando a que los bancos inviertan en la provisión universal y la restauración ecológica, en vez de fósiles, privatización, acumulación, etc. Bueno, estos son principios clave que nos pueden ayudar a democratizar la economía, a agarrar la soberanía de regreso y deben estar en la agenda. Esperemos su apoyo en estas iniciativas y sinceramente me alegra ver que tenemos aquí un gobierno que por lo menos toma estas cosas en serio. Y esto lo escribí antes de que lo dijo Sara, entonces lo voy a decir de todas maneras. Maldito sea el Estado de Israel, maldito sea el imperio gringo y maldito sea el capitalismo. ¡Viva Palestina libre y viva la ruptura! Gracias.
Thank you so much, JP, for painting the global picture, but also really bringing us back home in terms of what is possible with our imaginations. And I was at Utopia, one of the Utopias here in Mexico City, and I was blown away. And for me, it gave me an idea of what it could look like imagine if everywhere in the world there were like such services that are universally accessed by every person. I think it gave me a picture of what is possible. So thank you for bringing us back home and also like showing us really like concrete ways transformation and the revolution can happen. And now I'm gonna turn to wonderful speakers online, starting with my dear sister Corina Rodriguez. Sorry, I'm struggling with pronouncing your name, but I hope I haven't done a very bad job. So Corina is a Latin American feminist economist, is a member of the Executive Committee of Development Alternatives with Women for a New Era, but also with the same organization, Corina is political economy of globalization. She's part of the political economy of globalization team. Corina has been doing great work in terms of theorizing, but also really mobilizing, engaging, and carrying out advocacy. And today she will be speaking specifically on linking from a feminist perspective. Corina, I hope you are with us and you have the floor.
Yo también voy a hablar en español. ¿Me están escuchando ahí? Bueno, doy por sentado que sí. Buenísimo, bueno, un abrazo a todos desde la distancia. La verdad que está siendo una conversación muy estimulante y yo quería, desde la perspectiva feminista, traer una reflexión que se vincula con lo que recién mencionaba Dina, que ayer visitaron una de las utopías, porque justamente quería hacer una reflexión sobre el rol que le cabe al Estado en un proceso de ruptura para construir alternativas económicas. Y lo primero que señalaría es que el Estado es un terreno en disputa y hemos durante décadas teorizado largamente sobre el carácter que tiene el Estado y lo hemos calificado como Estado capitalista. Su principal función es administrar las tensiones sistémicas para que el capitalismo siga siendo el sistema socialmente preferido. Y también desde la teoría feminista lo hemos caracterizado como un Estado patriarcal, que con múltiples herramientas ha regulado sobre los cuerpos, sobre las sexualidades, sobre los roles sociales, sobre las oportunidades económicas. Sin embargo, desde los feminismos y especialmente de Beijing para aquí, hemos logrado algunos avances aliándonos estratégicamente y críticamente también con el andamiaje de las políticas públicas, del cual Utopía es un ejemplo. El Estado ha sido sin duda un aliado contradictorio. Le hemos arrancado logros en algunos países, en algunos territorios, desde la legalización del aborto hasta licencias para cuidar, pasando por políticas contra la violencia contra las mujeres, y podemos citar muchos ejemplos más y diversos ejemplos. Pero también el Estado ha hecho un uso instrumental de los derechos de las mujeres. Seguimos teniendo una justicia patriarcal, sigue habiendo brechas de género atravesadas por las múltiples interseccionalidades en todos los órdenes, e incluso en algunos países y en algunos territorios hemos estado teniendo o estamos teniendo retrocesos de esos logros conseguidos. Y sin dudas el Estado sigue siendo profundamente capitalista, y esto es algo que también hemos señalado desde el andamiaje feminista. El Estado está debilitado en sus facultades fiscales, tiene cada vez menos espacio para hacer política pública, porque está cooptado, entre otras cosas, porque está cooptado por las corporaciones, ¿no? Y eso profundiza su carácter capitalista. En algún sentido también el Estado se ha transformado casi en el brazo armado del capital para imponer la disciplina que el capital necesita. Y el poder del Estado también hoy está, en muchos sentidos, cuestionado por otros poderes económicos fácticos, como el poder de los tecnomagnates. Entonces, en este contexto, yo quería traer algunas preguntas y reflexiones para pensar un Estado para la ruptura. Y me parece que hoy, cuando en muchos de nuestros países crecen y se consolidan las visiones pro mercado que traen las derechas, me parece que reclamar el Estado puede ser justamente una posición contrahegemónica. Y además, pensar un sendero de ruptura significa lidiar con algunos puntos de entrada estructurales, y el Estado es uno de ellos. ¿Qué forma debería tener un Estado que sirva para este proceso de ruptura? Bueno, yo creo que debería ser el resultado de un nuevo contrato social que ponga a la sostenibilidad de la vida en el centro, y que al hacer esto también pueda recuperar su legitimidad, que el Estado pueda volver a ser sentido por las mayorías como una herramienta útil para sus vidas, como una herramienta necesaria para sus vidas. Yo creo que un Estado funcional a un proceso de ruptura tiene que tener entre sus objetivos y entre sus prácticas recrear la idea de lo común, de lo público. Un Estado que, en lugar de estar cooptado por las corporaciones, como están actualmente la mayoría de nuestros estados o todos los estados en distintos grados, esté cooptado por las personas, para lo cual necesitamos una burocracia, un andamiaje burocrático, un aparato burocrático que esté alineado con alguna forma efectiva de democracia participativa, que la ciudadanía tenga un control efectivo de ese andamiaje burocrático. Y sin duda, un Estado funcional a un proceso de ruptura tiene que regenerar su propio poder económico. Y esto se vincula con muchas de las cosas que se dijeron anteriormente. El proceso para mí tiene que ser uno en el que en algún sentido podamos ir cooptando al Estado desde visiones rupturistas y que utilicemos justamente su maquinaria para generar este poder común. Es sin dudas una disputa de poder, por lo tanto lo que necesitamos, y con esto cierro, son estrategias creativas para generar contrapoder, desde los territorios, desde las bases, desde nuestras propias experiencias con lo público en los distintos niveles, desde nuestras experiencias concretas de vida. Yo no dudo que las mayorías queremos vivir en un mundo distinto y creo que este encuentro es un ejemplo de eso. Queremos vivir en un mundo distinto, queremos vivir en un mundo mejor y de lo que se trata es de ponernos de acuerdo y de poner manos a la obra. Y como no las voy a poder abrazar en persona, les mando desde aquí un abrazo inmenso. Muchas gracias por generar este espacio tan potente de encuentro y ahí seguimos empujando por la ruptura.
Thank you so much, Corina. Warm hugs to you too, and thank you so much really for emphasizing the role of the state and really having a new system where the state is not being co-opted by corporates, you know, and really centering the lives and the well-being and the care of people. So thank you. There is so much love in the room. I don't know if you can see, but everyone was listening intently, and we are all sending you so much love. And now our last speaker, but definitely not the least, is a wonderful woman, and that is Esther, which I'm going to introduce Esther, and Esther is also going to be speaking from online, will be joining us online. Esther Kmak is a feminist indigenous leader from Peru, and also a founder of Intercontinental do Mulher Indigenous do... Can you help me read the founder of her organization?
Del Enlace Continental de Mujeres Indígenas de las Américas.
Thank you very much. I promise you next time I come back I'll have learned Spanish, because we must also be able to communicate as we are creating the revolution. But yeah, Esther is a wonderful woman. She's a fighter of indigenous people's rights and women's rights. Esther, you have the floor, and we miss you in the room, but we are really honored and happy that you are joining us online.
Muy buenos días, soy Esther Kmak Ramírez, soy quechua peruana, pero viviendo y mi trabajo es en Costa Rica. Trabajo con los pueblos indígenas, soy parte del Enlace Continental de Mujeres Indígenas, conocido como ECMIA. El ECMIA viene trabajando un proceso que se llama justicia económica. Este proceso nos ayudó a repensar como mujeres indígenas qué es la justicia económica. Muchas veces nosotras no habíamos trabajado sobre las mismas economías como parte de nuestros derechos, sino hemos estado más desde la perspectiva de la lucha por los derechos de los pueblos indígenas, de las mujeres indígenas, en la erradicación de las violencias, el fortalecer los liderazgos, la participación política, pero muy poco de temas de economía. Y desde que iniciamos el proceso, empezamos a preguntarnos qué es economía para nosotras. Pudimos identificar que primero, ancestralmente, todos los pueblos indígenas de las Américas tenían sus propios sistemas de economía que fueron destruidos por la colonia. Muchos de ellos se mantuvieron con algunas prácticas de comercio, de intercambio, de trueque, pero se ha desarticulado la totalidad de lo que es los sistemas económicos de los pueblos indígenas. Y empezamos a trabajar un poco sobre eso. Había tenido y tiene un impacto, y del cual le llamamos nosotros el dolor histórico o el trauma de la destrucción de la economía de nuestros pueblos, y empezamos a plantear la importancia primero de valorizar y la necesidad de recuperar nuestros propios sistemas económicos. Segundo, hacer un proceso de sanación de esos traumas económicos, de la economía, y parte de eso es que el despojo y el robo que nos han sometido ha hecho que nosotras no valoremos todo lo que poseemos, y que nosotros somos pueblos herederos de pueblos muy ricos, con mucha riqueza, que la Madre Tierra todavía nos sigue otorgando, y el cual empezamos a cambiar incluso nuestras propias formas de vernos a nosotros mismos. Y uno de ellos es la conceptualización de pobreza, ¿verdad? Nos han empobrecido, pero nosotros no somos pobres. El segundo momento, cuando hablamos de la economía, empezamos a recuperar sobre los principios en el cual se fundamenta nuestra propia economía, y nuestra economía se funda bajo los principios de la reciprocidad, el cuidado de la Madre Tierra y el cuidado individual y colectivo, ¿no? Tenemos en muchos pueblos con nombres muy diferentes, pero con los mismos conceptos, y afirmando que nuestros pueblos tenían sistemas de comercios más justos también, y la importancia de recuperar esos sistemas de comercio, cuáles son y qué cosas podemos poner también en esa economía de mercado. Por otro lado, identificamos también que la economía de mercado, que nos está haciendo mucho daño, está llevando a la muerte de la Madre Tierra, y en el cual estamos en resistencia. Nosotras empezamos a cambiar, por ejemplo, algunas formas como nos han enseñado, digamos, ¿no? Que los recursos que hay en nuestros territorios, mal llamados recursos naturales, dijimos que nosotras nunca más vamos a hablar de recursos naturales, sino son bienes de la Madre Tierra que nos da para vivir en abundancia, para vivir en plenitud, para vivir bonito, sin limitaciones, cubriendo las necesidades básicas de las familias, que es la alimentación, la salud, que son los principios básicos, incluidos la espiritualidad, incluidos la recreación como principios básicos de ese vivir bonito. Estamos poniendo en la base de nuestra palabra, tejiendo la palabra, la propuesta también de qué significa desde nosotras las mujeres indígenas la propuesta indígena del vivir, del summa causa o el vivir bien o el vivir bonito, poniendo también desde nuestras visiones, porque en este momento en muchos pueblos indígenas no se vive bonito, hay un sufrimiento, una lucha, un cansancio, y nosotros queremos reivindicar y construir a partir de nuestra meta de lograr soberanía económica. Nosotros no queremos hablar de empoderamiento económico, porque la lógica tanto de muchas mujeres, de los gobiernos cuando hablan de economía, nos plantean la importancia de trabajar en el empoderamiento económico y nosotras no queremos entrar en el empoderamiento económico, sino lograr la autonomía y la soberanía económica a partir de lo que tenemos, transformando también con tecnología lo que nosotros necesitamos. Y por último, decir que estamos construyendo una propuesta como mujeres indígenas y la necesidad de plantear una economía en equilibrio. No para decir que vamos a vivir en equilibrio con el modelo de la economía de mercado, sino bajo los principios del equilibrio que nos han enseñado nuestros abuelos, nuestras abuelas, y está en nuestra cosmovisión indígena, que viene desde el principio de respetar a la madre tierra, de pensar en nuestras raíces, nuestro presente y visualizar nuestro futuro, replantear principios de economía sobre la reciprocidad, el trabajo individual y colectivo.
Thank you so much, Esther, for really bringing such great, fresh perspective to this discussion, and also reminding us how the colonial project causes us trauma. And, you know, trauma from destroying our food, our medicines, our exploiting our knowledge, our labor, you know, and yet come back and sell us economic empowerment initiatives. And really, I like how you reject that. You reject the empowerment because it's, for feminists have always said it's not about just getting women, put them in the economy that doesn't anyways function, you know, like stand, mix, and continue. And thank you for laying that out very well in terms of that cannot be what we're working towards, but really working towards autonomy, liberation, and freedom. Thank you so much. We really do appreciate that, and working towards an economic system that centers healing and well-being and care of each other and care of the planet. Yeah, so with that, we have a few minutes to, do we have any minute at all? We really want to hear from the audience, but yeah. But Emilia is gonna guide us on the next steps.
Lo siento, estamos súper tarde, pero les tengo una propuesta. Primero, muchísimas gracias, un gran aplauso a estos panelistas de lujo, increíbles, que nos invitan a pensar desde otro lado. Muchas gracias a Dina Bustindarbeso por moderar también este panel. Un aplauso también para Dina. Y les quiero hacer una invitación, hagamos una clausura, tenemos una invitada muy especial para hacer la clausura y después pasamos al patio a oír al grupo de Son Jarocho, donde podrán también interactuar en vivo con las personas panelistas. Pero antes de salir, quería invitar yo aquí al podio a Dafne Cuevas, que es la secretaria de la Secretaría de las Mujeres de la Ciudad de México, una gran aliada, una feminista inspiradora a lo largo de todo su proceso, una leyenda en el espacio latinoamericano para promover, para sacudir a los estados y darnos una transformación real. Es una gran colega que aparte está ahora acompañándonos en este proyecto con un sueño, porque la Ciudad de México está también explorando estas nuevas vías para un nuevo sistema. Entonces, Dafne, es un honor para mí darte a ti la bienvenida a este festival para que nos acompañes en unas palabras antes de dar la clausura formal del espacio.
Muchas gracias. Muchísimas gracias, Emilia, qué bonita presentación, siento muy bonito. Me alegra mucho estar aquí en lo que es la clausura formal de este festival, pero que en realidad esta es la parte pública de una conversación que nos acompañó a lo largo de toda la semana, con la presencia de todas las compañeras, no solo las que fueron hoy panelistas, sino otras más en esta reunión internacional, para seguir pensando juntas, en colectivo, cuál es el mundo que queremos construir y qué se necesita para ir hacia ese rumbo. Entonces, yo estoy muy contenta de haber sido partícipe de esta semana. Estoy muy contenta de que muchas de las compañeras de la Secretaría de las Mujeres estaban emocionadas también de la discusión, participaron en diferentes momentos, hoy vinieron. Y sé que también hay gente conectada, como nuestra querida Corina, que nos hizo su presentación en línea. Así que, nada, este es un momento para mí importante, porque siempre la posibilidad de seguir pensando juntas, juntos, dándole forma a las propuestas con las que queremos darle rumbo al mundo y transformar, siempre es un sueño, ¿no? La incidencia es ese lugar desde donde queremos tirar hacia qué horizonte. Y hoy además yo tengo la posibilidad de intentar ejercicios concretos desde un gobierno de una ciudad que está intentando apuntalar hacia el rumbo de esas transformaciones, sin que sea fácil, digamos, es complejo, el mundo está cimbrado sobre estructuras donde cualquier cosa que quieras mover te detiene, te sostiene, te jala. Así que bueno, entendiendo el tamaño del reto, pues por eso el tamaño de las complicidades y de la construcción de alianzas y de los diálogos plurales. No tengo más que agradecer la presencia de todos y de todas, de los que dedicaron su tiempo para volar desde lejos, para estar aquí, las que se conectaron, las que llegaron hoy a esta parte pública de la reunión, y seguimos, porque tenemos hoy la continuidad de una conversación que no concluye, sino que sigue abriendo las puertas para que sigamos pensando juntas y para que tratemos de llevar a las realidades cotidianas nuestras propuestas transformadoras. Muchísimas gracias y hemos clausurado.
Muchas gracias, Dap. Y sin más, damos por clausurada, como dice Dafne. Quería hacer antes de cerrar y salir, los agradecimientos al equipo técnico, a las traductoras maravillosas que nos permitieron hacer esas alianzas a lo largo del mundo, al equipo técnico que ha estado aquí acompañándonos allá arriba, al equipo de Equidad, a Denise, a Armando, a Alma, a Sam, que han estado aquí, Mel, que viene también a acompañarnos, el equipo que está allá afuera, que nos ayudó al registro. Muchísimas gracias a todas y todos, al equipo de catering que está afuera. Y una cosita, por favor entreguen los dispositivos de interpretación, no se los vayan a llevar. Pero con esto vámonos al son jarocho y van a iniciar con 2 piezas rituales, el canario y no recuerdo el otro, pero ellos les van a comentar. Son piezas muy importantes, muy excepcionales para escucharlas en vivo, así que vamos y no nos lo perdamos. Y la ruptura empieza y sigue. Muchas gracias.